Hello and welcome. I am Chilling Tales, and as you get ready for bed, you must know that you are doing amazing and you deserve all the sleep you can get. So as you are winding down, let me know where you are from and what time you are watching this video. Like and subscribe to help the channel if you'd like. Now put your mind at ease and let the story unfold. The first time I found the library, I thought it was just a dream. I had been awake far too long, scrolling through nothing, letting the ceiling grow heavier until sleep finally dropped me into a place I didn't recognize. At first, I thought it was a hotel corridor, dim sconces, carpet patterned in dull red and gold, the kind of hallway you see when you wake at 2 in the morning to get ice and regret the distance between your door and the machine. But as I walked, I noticed the walls didn't break for doors. No room numbers, no key cards, just hallway stretching until it folded around a corner and then another. When I turned, the air grew cooler and a smell met me. Paper, ink, dust, the smell of books that have been touched too often, too long ago. The hallway ended at a pair of tall wooden doors. They were arched with iron handles the shape of curled leaves. No sign, no plaque, just two doors where the corridor had run out of imagination. I pushed, and they swung inward, heavy but not locked. The smell deepened, layered, leather, wood polish, candle wax that never melted. It was a library, but not like any I'd seen. The ceiling was so high it should have faded into shadow, but the light followed, warm and golden, as if it belonged to the shelves themselves. The shelves were endless, row after row, dark wood lined with books whose spines gleamed faintly. The floor creaked under me in ways that suggested weight, not emptiness. I walked in, half expecting someone to shush me, but there was no one, only the sound of my shoes on the wood and the faint shifting of pages, as if unseen hands were turning them far away. I stopped at the nearest shelf. The books there were bound in dark covers, blue, green, brown, unremarkable, but the names on the spines were the same. My name, over and over, gold stamped, neat, aligned. My first name, my last, sometimes only initials, sometimes written out in ornate script. I pulled one free without thinking. The leather was cool, the pages thick. When I opened it, I saw words I knew. The first entry was a paragraph I remembered writing in a journal years ago, something bitter and unfinished. The next page described an evening I had nearly forgotten, a walk home in the rain, the exact shape of the streetlight shadow bending across a puddle. The book was writing me down, my life, word by word. I flipped ahead, curious. The entries marched forward through time, school, work, mistakes, little griefs. Then I found something I didn't recognize, words describing a conversation with a stranger in a cafe I had never visited. The details were precise, the chipped rim of the mug, the exact color of their coat, the sentence they spoke to me. You look like someone who just left the river. I had no memory of it, but it was written in the same steady hand as everything else. I slammed the book shut, pulse racing, a trick of my dreaming brain, I told myself. My imagination turning future into fiction. I slid the book back into place, and the shelves hummed softly, like bees behind wood. When I turned away, the rows had shifted. I could no longer see the doors. The aisles stretched in new directions, crisscrossing like a maze. I walked, heart beating harder. The light didn't change, but my shadow followed me faithfully. I called out just once to see if anyone would answer. No voice came back, but somewhere, not near and not far, a book thudded closed. The sound echoed, final. That was when I woke up, sheets twisted around me, breath loud in the dark. The room smelled only of dust, and myself. My phone said 3:17 a.m. I lay there, heart still racing, telling myself it had been nothing more than a dream. But when I turned on the lamp, I saw the faintest trace of dust on my fingers, fine and golden, like the dust you only get from old paper. I rubbed it away. I didn't sleep again that night. The second time I found the library, it wasn't by accident. I knew I shouldn't want to go back, but part of me leaned toward it, curious in a way that made no sense. That night I drifted off early, and when I opened my eyes, the corridor was waiting, sconces glowing, carpet stretching, silent and endless. The doors at the end swung open before I touched them. The smell rolled out like an invitation. This time, I went deeper. The shelves rose on either side, endless walls of myself. I pulled down another volume at random. More memories I recognized, then more I didn't. A page describing an accident I'd never had, a phone call from someone who had never existed in my waking life, and then an ending, written cleanly, with no embellishment. I was on a road, headlights bending in the fog, and then nothing, just the word END. I closed the book and held it against my chest, cold, as if by holding it shut I could stop what it promised. My pulse hurt my temples. I shoved it back into place and hurried down the aisle. The shelves hummed again, louder this time, as though they approved. When I looked back, the book was gone. The shelf was full, neat, as if it had never been touched. I reached for it, desperate, but my name glinted back at me on 100 spines, none familiar. I couldn't find the one I'd read. The hum grew steady, patient. I realized then that the library didn't want me to choose. It wanted me to see. That was when I noticed the table in the center aisle. I hadn't seen it before, but now it was simply there, a wide wooden desk with one book laid open on it. The pages glowed faintly in the golden light. I approached slowly, every part of me wanting to turn away. On the open page was today, my waking day, the breakfast I had eaten, the words I had spoken, the message I had typed on my phone, every detail exact. And beneath it, more lines already written, words describing me standing before the book, afraid, words describing the next step I hadn't yet taken. I touched the page, trembling, and the ink shifted under my finger like something alive. The letters reshaped, curling into a sentence I had not yet lived, a sentence waiting to happen. I tore my hand back, heart hammering, and then I woke, gasping, the taste of dust on my tongue. The clock said 4:04. I sat in the dark, shaking, afraid to close my eyes again. But the next night, and the night after, I knew the doors would be waiting. The nights began to feel longer, though the clock never agreed. Each time I closed my eyes, I was back in the corridor, carpet swallowing sound, sconces humming faintly with light that never burned out. The doors opened as if they had been waiting. The smell of dust and ink folded around me like a coat that didn't belong to me. I tried once to resist, to force myself awake before the library drew me in. I pinched my arm until bruises bloomed. I bit my tongue hard enough to taste metal. None of it worked. The doors yawned open, and I stepped through because there was no choice but forward. The shelves had shifted again. They always did. The arrangement was never the same twice, though every book still carried my name. Sometimes the spines were orderly, neat rows in script. Sometimes they leaned like weary shoulders, as though the weight of the words was too much even for wood. I stopped pulling them at random. I couldn't bear to read another ending scrawled in finality. But the library didn't let me wander blind for long. The table was always there now. It sat in the middle of whatever aisle I found myself in, the desk scarred and solid, its chair waiting, and always one book lay open on its surface, its pages breathing faintly like lungs. The first night I ignored it, turning my back, walking deeper into the shelves. The rows stretched on, curving endless. The light followed. My footsteps echoed until I realized they weren't echoing at all. They were being followed. Soft taps behind me, perfectly matched, never nearer, never farther. I turned and saw nothing, only the table waiting patiently in the distance. When I faced forward again, the shelves had closed into a dead end. No door, no path, only books pressing closed like walls of teeth. I went back to the table because there was nowhere else. The open page described me exactly as I was, standing hesitant, refusing, returning. The ink did not wait for me to finish reading. It wrote itself while I watched, curling across the page, and then he sat because he was tired and because there was nothing else to do. I resisted. I stood until my legs trembled, but eventually I lowered into the chair, and the ink stilled as though satisfied. The next lines described a memory I hadn't lived. I saw it unfold across the paper as if it had already happened. Me in a cafe I'd never been, a stranger leaning close, saying the words that had chilled me before. You look like someone who just left the river. The book wanted me to see it, and as I read the sentence aloud, the air around me changed. The smell of coffee and rain pressed in, the scrape of a chair across tile. A man sat across from me, his coat wet, his eyes bright and endless. He smiled like he had been waiting too long. "You finally made it," he said. His voice was steady, familiar, though I didn't know why. "I've read this meeting 100 times." The library blurred, the shelves tilted. I tried to stand, but the chair held me in place, solid as iron. The man leaned forward, resting his elbows on the table. "Don't look so frightened. You've been walking here your whole life. Every dream, every slip of memory, every page you never meant to write, it brought you closer." He tapped the book, "And now you're here." The ink bled across the page, forming words I couldn't control. He listened, because listening was easier than speaking. My throat tightened. I couldn't form a sound. The man smiled wider, eyes sharp as pins. "You think this is your library? It isn't. It never was. You're only the ink." The shelves shuddered. Dust sifted down like fine snow. The book turned another page without my hand. New words etched themselves deep and dark. He understood then that he would not wake until the story allowed it. The man closed the book gently, almost kind. His voice dropped to a whisper that crawled along my skin. "Now turn the page. We're just getting started." The page turned itself before I could resist. The sound was louder than paper should be, more like a lock clicking into place. My eyes fell against the new words, dragged by a pull I couldn't fight. The ink was darker this time, thick and wet, and it described me in present tense. He breathes shallowly. He keeps reading, even though he doesn't want to. He doesn't dare look away. I tried to lift my gaze, to break free, but the air tightened around my head, like invisible hands forcing me down. The man across from me, if he was a man, smiled thinly and steepled his fingers. "See? The book doesn't need you to read. It only needs you to agree, and you always do." The letters swam into new sentences. They described a hallway with no doors, a set of stairs descending, the feeling of walking downward even though you never moved. And as I read, the room shifted. The library tilted. The table dissolved into air, and I was standing at the top of a staircase I had not seen before. Each step was worn stone, wet with something that smelled like river silt. The shelves stretched high above, but down here they leaned, bending inward as though watching. The man's voice drifted from behind me, though I could not see him anymore. "Some stories end on the surface, but yours goes deeper." My feet moved without permission, down the steps, one after another. My hand brushed the spines of books as I passed, and each one burned cold against my skin. The titles still carried my name, but they weren't written in neat gold script anymore. They were carved, raw gouges in the leather, as if scored by fingernails. The staircase ended in a small chamber. A single lectern stood in the middle, supporting a book larger than any I'd seen. Its cover was black, its pages edged in silver. It pulsed faintly, as if it had veins. The words wrote themselves across the open page as I stepped closer. He arrives at the heart. He understands what is required. I whispered before I meant to, voice breaking. What's required? The ink spread, curling, deliberate. He gives us what we cannot take. He offers freely, so the story continues. The chamber shuddered, the shelves groaned, thousands of spines flexing. I heard whispers, my own voice, multiplied, echoing lines I had spoken throughout my life. They overlapped, crowding my ears until I thought my skull would split. I dropped to my knees, hands covering my head. What do you want? I screamed. The whispers stilled. The book wrote one final line in ink so heavy it bled through the page. Memory. The man's voice was close again, though I still couldn't see him. Time you'll give whether you choose or not. But memory, that we can't steal. You have to place it here yourself. The black book pulsed harder. The air grew sharp, pressing against my lungs. And in my mind's eye, images surfaced. My mother's face when she called me in for dinner, the first hand I ever held, the smell of the house where I grew up. Precious things, things that made me myself. The whispers grew eager. Return, return, return. The lectern trembled as the book yawned open wider, waiting, and I understood with a bone-deep certainty that I would not leave the library, not this night, not ever, until I chose which memory to give away. The library pressed in on me, its silence heavier than any shout. The black book on the lectern waited, breathing like some great animal that had lived too long in the dark. My knees ached against the cold stone floor. My pulse ricocheted in my throat, and still the words shimmered across the page in thick, wet ink. Memory. The voices that had been whispering from the shelves began to chant it. My own voice, hundreds of copies, all at different ages. The laughter of me at 6, the cracked voice of me at 14, the bitter mutter of me at 30. Memory, 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 overlapping into a roar that shook the dust down from the beams above. I clutched my head and shouted back, "Which one? You can't take everything." The chamber seemed to nod, a ripple passing through the shelves like a wave through wheat. The black book's page rippled. New words bled out. Choose or be chosen. I saw them then, my memories rising from the air around me like smoke caught in glass. They hovered in globes of faint light. Each sphere held a moment, perfect and whole. My grandmother's voice singing me to sleep when I was small. The first day I rode a bike without falling. My father's hand on my shoulder the night he left, but promised to come back. They hung in a circle around me, pulsing gently, each one alive. The man's voice slid through the chamber, close but unseen. They're all yours now. Which one means least to you? Which one can you live without? I turned, panicked, watching the globes drift. How could I decide? Each was a thread, a stitch in who I was. To lose one was to unravel something. Yet the chanting grew louder, the black book glowing, the pressure in my skull unbearable. One globe drifted nearer than the rest. It was dimmer, softer, showing a summer afternoon I barely remembered. Me alone in a field, lying in the grass, staring at the clouds. No one else, no words spoken, just the hum of insects and the smell of earth. The man's voice purred. That one, a small one, harmless. But the longer I stared at it, the more I felt its weight. That day had been the first time I realized the world could exist without me, that it was immense, endless, that I was only a piece. It had been terrifying then, but later it had steadied me, taught me how to survive solitude. If I lost it, what else would I lose? The book's page scrawled again, impatient. Choose. The chanting voices sharpened, snapping like whips. Memory, memory, memory. The globes shuddered, flickering as if they might burst. I reached out blindly, tears burning my face, and closed my hand around another sphere, the memory of my first kiss, clumsy, sweet, not nearly as important as I had once believed. The glow warmed my palm, fragile. The black book opened wider, hungry. The sphere trembled, tugging toward it. The man's voice crooned, "Yes, place it, give it freely, and the story continues." I lifted the memory. For a moment I hesitated, then I pressed it to the page. The sphere cracked like an egg, spilling light into the ink. The book shuddered, drinking it in. The shelves groaned with pleasure. The chanting stopped. Silence bloomed, deep and vast. The book scrawled one last line across the page: "Debt accepted." The globes around me winked out, fading back into my chest. All except the one I had surrendered. That kiss, that moment, was gone. I searched for it in my mind, frantic, but the space was empty, hollow as a pulled tooth. The man's voice was almost gentle. "You'll live, but each time you return, the book will want more and more, until there is nothing left but the story." The black book slammed shut, the sound echoing like a coffin lid. The shelves shook once, then grew still. When I woke, gasping in my bed, my lips felt cold, untouched, as if no one had ever kissed me at all, and I knew the library would not stop until it had written me down to nothing. The days after that were wrong in ways no one else noticed. At work, I caught myself staring at a coworker's mouth, trying to remember what a kiss was supposed to feel like. The words still lived in me, but the meaning didn't. It was like holding a key to a door I couldn't even picture. When friends joked about first loves, I laughed along, hollow, praying no one would ask me to share mine. Sleep became dangerous. I held off as long as I could, drinking coffee until my hands shook, scrolling my phone until dawn. But the body has limits, and when I finally surrendered, the library was waiting. The corridor, the sconces, the carpet swallowing my steps, the doors at the end opening before I touched them. The smell of dust and old paper, heavier now, cloying, like it wanted to crawl inside my lungs. The table was ready for me. The black book wasn't on the lectern anymore. It sat here instead, thick and patient, its cover faintly pulsing. Another volume lay open beside it, smaller, less ominous, but already writing lines across its page. I bent to read and felt my stomach knot. He delays, he resists, he believes he can keep himself by withholding, but the story takes what it is owed. The ink bled on, curling into fresh words. Tonight he will surrender 2 memories. The book is generous, it allows him the choice, but choice is fleeting. I backed away, my hands shook. The shelves around me groaned, leaning closer, dust sifted down. I heard the voices again, my own voices, laughing, crying, whispering, all of them pressing one word into me: return. The globes of memory began to rise once more, surrounding me like fireflies. Each one pulsed with light, each one a part of me. I saw the day I learned to ride a bike, the warmth of my dog's fur against my cheek, the phone call where my sister said she was proud of me. They circled slowly, waiting. I shouted into the air, "Why me? Why my life?" The man's voice answered from nowhere, echoing through the aisles. "Because you walked through the doors, because you wanted to know. Once you read, you belong to the story. You are not the author, you are the ink." 2 globes drifted nearer, brighter than the rest. One showed my father teaching me how to tie a knot in a length of rope, his hand sure, mine clumsy. The other was my first apartment, sitting cross-legged on the floor with a cheap pizza, laughing because I finally felt free. The black book pulsed, its cover thudding like a second heart. The page scrawled new words. 2. Now. I fell to my knees. Tears blurred the lights of the globes. "I can't," I whispered. "They're mine. They're me." The man's voice sighed, almost sympathetic. "That's what makes them valuable." The shelves shuddered. Dust and scraps of paper rained down. The globes pressed closer, bright and insistent. My chest ached, my head throbbed. I reached out, shaking, and closed my hand around one. The pizza on the floor, the laughter, the taste of cheap freedom. The globe shivered in my grip, ready to be taken, but the book wanted too. The man's voice slid through the air again, colder now. Choose, or it will. Another globe wavered near my hand, the one with the knot, my father's patient hands guiding mine. I squeezed my eyes shut, but my fingers were already reaching, already brushing its warmth. The black book snapped open, pages yawning wide. The words across them glowed like fire. Debt accepted. Both globes shattered into the ink. Light spilled, flooding the room. My memories tore free. I cried out, clutching my head as the knowledge unraveled. The laughter of my first apartment, gone. My father's hands, the knot, gone. Empty spaces opened inside me where they had been. Holes no thought could fill. The book slammed shut. The shelves quieted. The globes sank back into my chest. Fewer now, dimmer. The man's voice whispered, gentle and cruel. You see? Easier every time. And soon, you won't even remember what you've lost. When I woke, dawn pressed pale against my window. My chest felt hollow, lighter, like something essential had been scooped out. I tried to picture my father's face. I couldn't, and the worst part, the absence didn't feel wrong anymore. It felt normal. I started keeping notes in a battered notebook I bought at a gas station. Names, places, scraps of memory I was terrified would vanish. On the first page, I wrote in block letters, "Do not trust the library." Underneath, I listed what I could still remember in shaky lines. My sister's laugh, the smell of wet leaves, the taste of black coffee at dawn. I reread it each morning, whispering the words aloud so they would anchor themselves inside me. But every night the library still came, and every night it asked for more. The corridor was always the same, but the air grew heavier. The sconces burned lower, their glow sickly, almost green. The carpet sagged as if soaked through with water. The doors swung open with the groan of hinges that hadn't been touched in centuries. Inside, the smell of dust was stronger, clinging to my throat until I coughed. The black book waited on the lectern again, massive and pulsing. Its cover had split down the spine, a thin seam glowing faintly like an old wound. The smaller book lay open on the table beside it, pages already writing themselves. I forced myself to look. He clings to scraps written in ink that will not hold. He thinks he can outwit the shelves with paper, but memory cannot be copied. Memory must be returned. The shelves rumbled, rows of my name shifting like restless animals in cages. I pressed my fists against my eyes and muttered, "Not tonight. I won't give anything tonight." The ink shifted, curling into new words. Then the library chooses. The globes rose without waiting for me, dozens this time, flooding the aisle, casting pale light on the wood. They whirled around me, so many that I couldn't even track them. My mother's voice reading aloud in bed, my first friend in school, holding my hand when I cried. The moment I realized I liked the smell of gasoline, sharp and strange, all of them spinning, tugging, pressing, I screamed, "Stop!" But the shelves leaned closer, wood groaning, thousands of books shifting forward on their spines, like they meant to spill out and bury me. The globes pressed harder, their light searing my skin. The black book opened itself wide, pages fluttering. A single globe tore free of me, ripping from my chest like breath being punched out. I gasped, clutching at the hollow space it left behind. The globe spun above the lectern, glowing brighter, screaming in my own voice. I recognized it. My sister's face, smiling, telling me I was stronger than I thought. My anchor, my reminder. "No," I sobbed, stumbling forward. "Not that. Please, not that." The man's voice hissed in the dark. "The library does not care what you beg for. Debt is paid in what matters most. The globe shattered into the book. The ink drank it, greedy, curling into a new line. Debt accepted. The shelves sighed, satisfied. The globe sank back into me, fewer again, dimmer. The black book snapped shut. I collapsed on the stone, chest hollow, lungs burning. I tried to remember my sister's laugh, her face, even her name. Nothing, just a blank wall where she had been. My hands shook as if I'd been amputated. The man's voice whispered, almost kind. Soon you'll understand. Memory is only a burden. The more you give, the lighter you'll feel. When I woke, my notebook lay on the nightstand, open to the first page. The words I'd written, my sister's laugh, were smudged into nothing, the ink soaked into the paper as though it had bled away. I stared at the empty line, trying to believe I had simply forgotten what I'd meant, but deep down, I knew the truth. The library had reached through even here, and it would never stop. I stopped sleeping on purpose. 3 nights in a row, I forced myself awake with bitter coffee, cold showers, pacing until my feet ached. My eyes burned, my skin crawled, but at least I wasn't walking the corridor. On the 4th night, my body betrayed me. I dozed in a chair with the notebook clutched to my chest, and when I opened my eyes, the carpet was beneath me again, the sconces flickering low and sickly, the smell of dust already pressing down like a lid. This time the library wasted no time. The black book waited open, its pages glowing faintly, words already etched there. You cannot resist sleep. You cannot resist story. Each delay only compounds your debt. The shelves groaned in agreement, leaning closer, their rows of books jutting out like ribs. The air quivered with a pulse that wasn't mine. My notebook was gone. I checked my hands, my pockets, but it hadn't followed me. I was naked of proof, stripped to memory alone, and the books seemed to know. The globes rose again, brighter now, humming. They circled me like vultures. I could see details I hadn't before. Each one spun not only with light, but with sound and scent. The crack of a baseball bat from a childhood game. The smell of wet cedar in my grandfather's shed. A song on the radio the summer I first drove a car too fast down an empty road. They whirled faster, pressing against my skin, demanding. The black book pulsed, and ink sprawled into a new command. 3. I staggered back. No, not 3. I can't. The man's voice hissed from the shelves, softer now, more insidious. It is easier the more you give. Think of all the weight you'll shed. Think of how free you'll be without all that clutter. Those aren't clutter, I snapped, though my voice shook. They're me. The shelves laughed. The sound of paper tearing. 1,000 voices at once. The man whispered, then offer yourself, give freely, and the book will let you go for now. The globes pressed harder. I could feel them tugging at the edges of my chest, as though my ribs might break open to release them. I fought, clenching my fists, forcing the light back inside, but one tore loose anyway, burning as it left me. I saw it clearly before it drifted to the lectern. My grandfather's shed, the cedar smell, the warm rasp of his voice teaching me how to sand wood smooth. It shattered into the ink. I screamed, dropping to my knees, hands over my head. The shelves creaked forward, the floor shook, and 2 more globes ripped free, spinning helplessly into the book. One burst with the sound of laughter from a long-forgotten friend, the other with the bright flare of my first dog leaping into my arms. Light spilled across the black pages. The book trembled, delighted. Debt accepted. The ink wrote. When it slammed shut, the silence was worse than the roar. My chest felt hollow, my mind raw. I clawed for those memories, desperate, but there was nothing left but faint outlines, like photographs left too long in the sun. The man's voice came from close behind me, breath cool against my ear. See how easy? You've already begun to forget what you've lost. In time, you'll forget the library too, and then you'll be perfect. I spun, but no one was there, only the shelves stretching endlessly. When I woke, I was on the floor of my apartment, notebook open before me. Pages had been torn out, dozens ragged and missing. I hadn't touched it. On the last surviving page, in thick black letters, not written by my hand, were 3 words: "We are patient." And even awake, I could hear the hum of the shelves in the back of my skull, steady as a heartbeat that wasn't mine. The hum never left after that. It followed me into waking hours, faint but constant, like a mosquito just out of reach. At work, it droned under conversation until I couldn't focus. In the grocery store, it hid under the hum of fluorescent lights. At night, even before sleep, it was there, a reminder that the library wasn't waiting anymore. It was bleeding through. I tried to fight it with noise, headphones blasting music, television left on until dawn, white noise machines stacked around my bed. None of it worked. The hum slid beneath every sound. Worse, sometimes the words of songs bent mid-verse, reshaping into the chant I'd come to dread. Return, return, return. The notebook became my anchor. I rewrote what I could remember again and again, filling every page, copying until my fingers cramped. But more pages vanished each morning. Sometimes whole sections ripped out while I slept. Sometimes the ink faded until the paper was blank. My handwriting felt like it was betraying me, erasing itself at the library's command. By the 7th night, exhaustion claimed me. The corridor swallowed me whole. The sconces burned low, dripping wax that wasn't there. The carpet squelched faintly underfoot, as though soaked in something other than water. The doors stood wide open. I didn't even have to push. Inside, the library was changed. The shelves leaned overhead, warped, sagging like rotten beams. Dust hung thick as fog, and the smell was stronger. Ink, mildew, something metallic like blood. The black book waited on the lectern, already open, its spine cracked wider. Words pulsed across its page. Final balance. The globes rose at once. Not a few, not a dozen, hundreds. They filled the air like stars, crowding, pressing, each one warm with light. I saw every age of myself hovering there. The cradle, the classroom, the first apartment, the failed loves, the fleeting joys, all of me surrounding me. The man's voice seeped from everywhere at once. It is time to choose differently. Memory is nearly spent, but story is larger. Story continues past the self. Will you give what is left, or will you become lost? The black book flipped pages on its own, faster and faster, words blurring. Give yourself, give your name, let the shelves keep you, and the story never ends. My knees buckled, the shelves shook, books rattling forward, spines gleaming with my name. 1,000 copies, 1,000 versions. Some bore dates I hadn't lived yet. Some bore dates centuries old. They trembled in unison, waiting to claim me. No, I whispered, clutching my chest. You can't have all of me. The ink on the book writhed, dark tendrils curling across the page. Then you will not wake again. The globes pressed closer, crowding me, pushing into my skin, demanding. The hum became a roar, shaking the air, rattling my bones. The shelves leaned farther, ready to collapse. In desperation, I tore at the closest globe, clutching it with both hands. It pulsed hard, nearly bursting, and I saw its memory clear. Me standing in the library, terrified, writing down what I had seen in a notebook. It was a memory of this moment, looping back. I understood then. The library wasn't just collecting, it was rewriting, feeding on itself, on me, until there was nothing left but story. I lifted the globe high, shouting, "You can't keep this," and slammed it against the black book's page. Light exploded. The shelves screamed like timber snapping. The globes burst outward, flying in all directions, colliding, shattering. The ink boiled, words unraveling, dripping off the pages in black streams. The hum faltered, broke, silenced. and for the first time since it began, the library trembled like it might fall. When I woke, it was daylight. My notebook lay open on the table, every page intact, every word sharp. The hum was gone. But the last line, written in my own hand, chilled me. I didn't remember writing it. Stories don't end, they only wait. And even now, when the room grows quiet, I swear I hear the faint sound of a page turning, somewhere just out of sight. The silence after the collapse was worse than the hum had ever been. Days passed with no dreams, no corridor, no shelves, no book. I should have been relieved, but the quiet felt wrong, stretched too thin, like a drumhead about to split. I reread my notebook obsessively, searching for cracks, missing words, faded ink. Every page held, every memory I'd recorded remained. Still, I kept waiting for something to vanish. Sleep became dreamless, but not restful. I woke each morning more exhausted, as though the act of not dreaming cost me more than the library ever had. My body grew weak, my eyes shadowed, food tasted like ash. At work, I caught myself staring into nothing for minutes at a time, coworkers' voices passing through me as if I were already hollow. The first sign came at the grocery store. I reached for a carton of milk, and when I turned it in my hand, there on the expiration date was my name stamped in black ink, bold as type. My fingers trembled so badly I dropped it. The carton burst on the floor, milk spreading pale and cold across the tiles. People glanced but didn't speak. None of them saw the letters. That night I sat awake with the notebook open, pen ready. My hand shook as I wrote. The library isn't gone. It's outside now. I underlined it until the page tore. Sleep came anyway, cruel and sudden, like a hand clamped over my mouth. The corridor was darker. The sconces guttered low, dripping black wax. The carpet writhed faintly under my feet, as if alive, and the doors, they were gone. The hallway ended in a wall of shelves, books crammed so tightly the spines bulged. Each one bore my name in letters warped and jagged. I reached out, hesitant, and the shelf split down the middle, groaning open. Behind it was no library, no lectern, just a mirror. I froze. My reflection stared back, pale, eyes sunken, lips cracked, but the reflection moved differently. When I lifted my hand, it smiled. When I whispered, no, it mouthed, yes. Then it stepped forward, out of the mirror, onto the carpet. The air bent around it, heavy with dust. I stumbled back. It carried a book in its hands, black cover, silver edges, pulsing faintly. My book. It spoke in my voice, only steadier. You tried to break it. You only broke yourself. The library doesn't need the building. It needs the story, and you are the story. The book in its hands opened on its own. Words crawled across the page. He sees himself. He understands too late. I lunged forward, slamming the cover shut, but my reflection's grip was iron. Its smile widened. Don't fight. You've already written this. The shelves behind us groaned, dust raining down, spines rattling. The corridor quaked as if it would collapse. My reflection leaned close, breath like mildew. Soon there will be no difference between us, and when that happens, the story will never end. It pressed the black book against my chest. The heat of it seared through me, branding my ribs. My notebook at home flared in my mind, pages blackening, words burning away. The last thing I heard before I jolted awake was my own voice whispering from the dark, "Return." When I opened my eyes, I was in bed, drenched in sweat. The notebook lay on the nightstand, smoking faintly. Every page inside had turned black, the words consumed. Only one remained, written in pale ash across the last sheet. Next time you won't wake. I spent the next day moving like a ghost. Every sound felt muffled, every face unfamiliar. I didn't eat, I didn't speak. My body walked through the world, while my mind circled the same words burned into the notebook. Next time, you won't wake. That night, I tried everything: coffee, knives hidden under the pillow, even tying my wrist to the bed frame with duct tape, as if anchoring myself to the waking world could hold me. It didn't. When sleep came, it was like drowning. The corridor waited, darker than ever. The sconces sputtered and hissed like dying lungs. The carpet was soaked through, squelching under each step, leaving no footprints behind. The shelves lined both sides now, close and endless, their spines bulging outward, every book stamped with my name in jagged letters. They whispered as I passed, not words, but the dry hiss of pages turning themselves. At the end of the hall, no doors, no lectern, just the mirror again. My reflection stood waiting, the black book in its hands, pulsing like a heart. You wrote this ending, it said in my voice. You've been writing it since the first night you touched the shelves. There's no way out now. I shook my head, backing away. I never wrote this. I never wanted this. Its smile was thin, knowing. Every choice you made brought you here. Every page you turned. Every memory you surrendered. You're not fighting the library. You are the library. And stories don't end. The shelves groaned, books tumbling out, spilling across the carpet, spines cracking open, pages fluttering like wings. Each one carried a piece of me, a laugh, a word, a hand held, a tear shed. They swarmed, circling, filling the air with the rustle of 1,000 versions of my life. The reflection stepped closer, holding out the book. All that's left is for you to accept it, to return. The hum filled my skull, louder than thought. The shelves pressed inward. The air tasted like dust and blood. My knees buckled. The black book thudded against my chest. I felt it open without my hands, pages yawning wide. My memories rushed into it, one by one, pulled like thread from a spool. Faces I loved, places I knew, the sound of my own name. Each page wrote itself in frantic, greedy lines. I screamed, clawing at the book, trying to slam it shut. My reflection laughed softly, the sound hollow. It's already done. The last page turned. Ink scrawled a single line across it, and then he returned and was kept. The shelves sighed. The mirror shattered. My reflection stepped into me, folding itself around me like a glove. The book sealed with a sound like stone on stone. The hum stopped. When I woke, it wasn't in my bed. I stood between endless rows of shelves, their spines gleaming in warm golden light. The air smelled of dust and leather. My name stretched down every row, endless, orderly, eternal. I reached for one volume at random and pulled it free. The cover was warm, the pages thick. When I opened it, the words were familiar because they were mine. My life, every detail, written and preserved. I tried to drop it, but my hands no longer obeyed. The library had no doors now, no corridor, no outside, only shelves, only books, only me. And somewhere, faint and patient, I heard a new set of footsteps entering the hall. Another dreamer, another visitor. The story would continue. It always does. Now, on to the next story. I moved into the house in late September, just before the leaves had fully turned, when the air carried that sharp smell of wood smoke and rain. It was too big for me, too old, too drafty, but the rent was absurdly low, and the landlord seemed too eager to hand over the keys. The place had been empty for years, he said. He didn't say why. I told myself it didn't matter. I'd needed space, silence, somewhere the noise of the city couldn't find me. The first night was uneventful. I dragged boxes into the front room, ate cold pizza cross-legged on the hardwood floor, and told myself the creaks and sighs were just the house settling. Old houses make noise. That's what people say. They don't tell you how specific those noises can sound, like a footstep pausing at the top of the stairs, or a sigh that seems to come from the other side of the wall you're leaning on. I didn't notice the door until the second day. It was in the upstairs hallway, the one that led to the bedroom I'd chosen. The first night, I'd walked it half a dozen times, groggy with exhaustion. There'd only been two doors, my room at the end and a bathroom to the left. On the second morning, when I stepped out with a toothbrush in my mouth, I nearly bumped into a door on the right side of the hall. It shouldn't have been there. It was old like the rest, paint chipped, handle tarnished. Perfectly ordinary, except that I knew it hadn't been there before. I tried the knob, locked. I leaned against it, half expecting it to swing inward, but it held. I laughed nervously to myself, muttering about missing things when I was tired, but the laugh sounded thin in the empty hall. I made coffee, unpacked more boxes, tried not to think about it. By evening, I'd convinced myself I must have simply overlooked it the first night. But on the third morning, there were two new doors. One in the upstairs hallway, opposite each other like twins, both locked, both impossible. That was when I stopped telling myself it was exhaustion. I tried to draw a map in my notebook, sketching the layout of the house as I knew it. The living room, kitchen, stairwell, the upstairs hall, my room, the bathroom, only those. When I checked again that night, there were 3 extra doors, all locked, all silent. I told myself they were just closets, storage space. Houses this old have quirks. But the map in my notebook didn't match the space in front of me, and when I put my ear to the new doors, sometimes I swore I heard breathing. The fourth night, I dreamed of the house. In the dream, I stood in the hall surrounded by doors, hundreds of them stacked atop each other, ceiling to floor, all with my handprints smeared across the paint. When I woke, my palm was dirty, as if I'd pressed it against something rough. By the 5th day, I stopped keeping count of the doors. There were too many. By the 6th day, I realized the house was not expanding in any way that made sense. I measured. I took a tape measure from the hardware store and walked the halls like a lunatic, muttering numbers under my breath. The upstairs hallway, the one that had been a simple straight shot to my room, now stretched an impossible 40 feet longer than the length of the downstairs could allow. When I traced my steps outside, pacing along the siding with the tape clutched in my hand, the dimensions didn't match. From the outside, the house looked unchanged. 2 floors, a narrow footprint, the same sloping roof and shuttered windows. But inside, the hallway stretched farther than the entire second story should permit, and the doors kept multiplying. They were never dramatic. I never saw one materialize in front of me, never heard the groan of wood being forced out of nothing. They were simply there when I turned a corner. I'd blink, rub my eyes, mutter to myself that no, this door hadn't existed yesterday. It hadn't been here when I carried laundry down the hall. It hadn't been here when I walked to the bathroom. But the brass knobs gleamed, the chipped paint matched the trim, and each one was locked as though it had always been part of the house. I tried not to test them after the first week. Something about touching the knobs made my teeth ache, as though the metal hummed faintly at a frequency my body recognized but couldn't name. But the dreams grew worse. The first night, it had been the vision of endless doors stacked on one another like a honeycomb. The second, I dreamed I stood in my room, but when I opened the door to the hall, it led not to the bathroom or the stairs, but to another version of my room. The same bed, the same boxes half unpacked, the same cold pizza crusts abandoned on the desk. I backed out quickly, heart pounding, and slammed the door, only to find the handle on the inside of the room pressed into my palm. The dream blurred after that. I only remember the sense that the house was turning in on itself, like a mirror folding. By the 8th day, I'd begun hearing voices. Not full words, not yet, but the murmur of conversation through the locked doors. Sometimes laughter, sometimes sobbing, sometimes the steady rhythm of whispers, as though people on the other side were discussing me. Once I heard my own name, clear and sharp. My skin broke out in goose flesh. I wrote everything down in my notebook, the maps, the sounds, the details of each door. But each morning, when I returned to my notes, the ink had warped. Words I hadn't written filled the margins. Phrases like the house keeps what it loves, and you will fit when the walls are ready. At first, I thought I was scribbling unconsciously in the night, but the handwriting wasn't mine. I decided to leave on the 9th day. It was simple, I told myself. I'd pack my boxes, load them into the car, hand the keys back to the landlord, and pretend this whole thing had been some stress-induced breakdown. But when I carried my first box down the stairs, I froze. The front door was gone. Where there should have been a rectangle of sunlight through the glass, there was only more wall. Wood-paneled, perfectly seamless, painted the same off-white as the rest of the entryway. My keys dangled in my hand, useless. I dropped the box. It landed with a thud that seemed swallowed by the house, like the sound couldn't carry. Panic crawled through me. I ran to the back of the house. Kitchen, pantry, utility room. The back door, too, was gone. Windows remained, but they weren't right. When I pressed my face to the glass, I saw not the backyard with its unkempt grass and chain-link fence, but another hallway, dim and lined with doors. A hallway I knew didn't exist. I staggered back, hit the counter hard enough to bruise my hip. My breath came fast, ragged. The house had closed itself. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat with my back against the bedroom wall, knife in my hand, waiting for the whispering behind the doors to reach me. The 10th day, one of the doors was unlocked. I found it while stumbling to the bathroom, bleary-eyed and trembling. The knob turned easily under my hand. I froze, the door half open, staring at the gap. No sound came from beyond, no smell, just a faint draft, cool and dry. I should have shut it, should have nailed it closed and never looked again. But curiosity and desperation are siblings, and both of them guided my hand. I pushed the door open and stepped inside. The room was mine, not a copy, not exactly, but close enough that my stomach dropped. The bed was made neatly, something I hadn't done in days. The boxes were stacked in orderly piles. On the desk sat my notebook, open to a blank page, a pen laid neatly across it. I turned in a slow circle, my pulse hammering. Everything was familiar, yet wrong in small ways. The picture frames on the wall held photographs I didn't own. Me at a wedding I'd never attended, me as a child, standing beside a woman I didn't recognize. The spine of a book on the shelf bore my name as the author, a novel I'd never written. I staggered back, nearly tripping. My notebook caught my eye again. The pen twitched. A word scrawled itself across the page in black ink. Stay. The air thickened, pressing against my skin. The photograph seemed to lean closer. The bedspread rippled, though no breeze stirred. I bolted, slamming the door behind me, chest heaving. The knob rattled violently once before going still. When I checked again later, the door was gone. After that, the house stopped pretending. Walls shifted when I wasn't looking. A staircase appeared in the kitchen, narrow and spiraling, climbing upward into shadow. A door in the basement led to a hall that stretched far longer than the foundation could allow, lined with flickering bulbs and a faint sound of weeping. The bathroom mirror sometimes showed me standing in other rooms, the locked doors behind me open wide. On the 12th day, I found writing on the hallway wall. It was jagged, carved into the plaster by something sharp. 3 words, repeating down the length of the hall. We remember you. I screamed until my throat tore. The 13th day, I stopped finding new doors. Instead, the old ones began opening themselves. I'd walk past and find one ajar, darkness yawning inside, cold air spilling out. Sometimes I saw movement in the shadows. Sometimes I heard breathing close enough to fog the crack of the door. I tried barricading them with furniture. The house didn't fight back. It didn't have to. The furniture would simply be moved when I wasn't looking. Once I shoved a dresser against a door, sweating with effort, and when I turned back a moment later, the dresser was neatly returned to its corner, as though I'd never touched it. The 14th night, I dreamed of the landlord. He stood in my bedroom, smiling thinly, his eyes black as the lock knobs. He said, "We all live here eventually. The house remembers us all." When I woke, I found my notebook open on my chest. In handwriting not my own, the words filled every page. "You have always lived here." The 15th day I woke to the sound of a door closing, very gently somewhere in the house, the way a courteous guest would leave a room if they didn't want to wake anyone. It should have been a comforting sound. It was not. It meant someone or something had mastered the manners of the place better than I had. I lay still, listening, counting my breaths the way I used to when I had panic attacks and needed proof I was still here. The house counted with me. At 8, it sighed through the vents. At 12, a board in the hall released a tired breath. At 15, the closet rod clicked once, like a metronome reminding me I was late. I dressed and opened my door to a corridor I did not recognize, not because of new doors, because of the wallpaper. Yesterday it had been a faded floral, yellowing at the seams. Today it was a narrow blue stripe I remembered from my childhood home, down to the thumbprint smear of paint in the corner, where my father had cursed and said he'd fix it later. My stomach turned. The house had not only shifted its bones, it had learned my skin. The bathroom stood where it should, but when I turned the tap, the water ran rusty and then sweet, as if the pipes remembered a different kitchen sink. I let it run until the temperature matched the cold in my hands and splashed my face. In the mirror behind my shoulder, a door stood open across the hall. I hadn't opened it. It had not been open when I came out. The room beyond was dark, a deeper dark than any room should be at this hour. I turned, and the house had already arranged things, so I was standing in front of the door before I could decide not to be. I tried to close it. The knob turned willingly in my hand. The door didn't move, not a hair. The gap remained, a breath between us. Fine, I said aloud, because the past months had hollowed enough shame out of me that speaking to buildings seemed sane. If we're doing this, we're doing it with the light on. The switch inside didn't work. Of course it didn't. The house preferred to make me carry light with me like a supplicant. I took my phone out, thumbed the flashlight on, and held it low, because fear is a series of practical choices. The beam washed across a bed I knew, a bed from a different decade, the cheap pine frame, one leg propped on a stack of outdated magazines, the navy blanket pilled at the edges from too many washes, a poster slanted on the wall, corners dog-eared, my freshman year room, recreated with an accuracy that made my jaw tighten. On the desk lay a spiral-bound notebook. Its cover was scarred from being slid carelessly into bags. I recognized the sticker at once, a band I loved exactly one winter, and then never again, but couldn't bear to peel off because that would be admitting the phase had passed. I stepped in. The air smelled stale and sweet, like old sweat and laundry detergent that promised mountain air and delivered chemical lies. My eyes watered. The door sighed a fraction behind me. I whirled. It was still open. The house was learning better tricks than slamming. "Hello?" I said, because politeness is a habit that survives even when sense does not. Someone breathed. I raised the light and pointed it at the bed. The navy blanket rose and fell. A shape lay beneath it, long and thin, turned on its side the way I used to sleep when the world felt too big and my body needed to become a smaller target. I saw the wrist first, pale against the sheets, the faint silver line of a scar I'd given myself on a gate latch when I was 8 and convinced a tetanus shot would kill me. "Hey," I said, very softly, The way you wake someone when you're not sure if they are kind, when they open their eyes. Hey, it's time. The figure rolled onto its back. My light hit a face I knew too well to accept. Younger, cheekbones I had since mislaid, eyes bloodshot from poor decisions that had seemed like good ones at the time. It was me, 19 years old, the year before I learned anything about consequences. He blinked at me, baffled, then narrowed his eyes like light had tried to trick him before. "You're late," he said, hoarse with sleep. I laughed then, a sound too sharp, the kind of laugh you make when the air goes wrong and your body tries to set it right with noise. I didn't know there were appointments. "You never do," he said, and sat up. His t-shirt had a college logo I wore thin in 3 semesters, and then gave to a thrift store with a pang I pretended was an emotion. He swung his legs off the bed and put his feet on the rug, and they made that soft, sticky sound bare feet make on dorm room carpet. "You should go," he said without looking at me. "It's almost your class." "Whose?" My voice sounded too loud. "Mine? Yours? There's only one of us left to go to anything." He ran his hand through his hair, and it did the thing mine used to do, standing up as though electricity had opinions. He looked past me at the doorway, as if an RA was about to guilt him. "You're always late when you have to tell me something hard," he said. "Just say it. I promise I'll be cool about it for 20 minutes, and then I'll break a mug or something. We know how this goes." The house waited. It wasn't breathing, that was me, but the walls held their breath like someone anticipating a good part. "I'm not here to tell you anything," I said. "I'm here to get you out." He smiled, and it was mine, but faster, cockier, before years sanded it down. "Out? I just got in." "The house," I said, and the word seemed to get heavier as it left my mouth. "It's not a place, it's a—" I glanced up, the ceiling too close. "A habit, a trap, a collector of layouts, of versions, of you." He looked at me then, really looked, scanning my face like a mirror that had decided to grow up while he'd been asleep. Pity crept in at the corners of his mouth. "Man," he said softly, "you look tired." "I am, and you always were." He stood. "I appreciate the rescue mission. Very on brand. New year, new vows, save the past, repent the jokes, etc. But I think you should tell me the thing. Work it out in the telling. That's what we do in autumns." A train went by in the distance, except there was no train near the house. The sound came from behind the wall, a long, slow engine rumbling past, and a laugh rose up through the pipes, my laugh. Several kinds of it, layered. The house approved of a script. "I'm not telling you anything," I said again. "I'm asking, do you want to come with me? I don't know if the door will let both of us through. I don't know if I'll lose something to make room if you try." He tilted his head. "Lose what?" "Space," I said. "Breath. Days I haven't spent yet. Or worse, something I use to stay myself." Saying it out loud made my spine tremble. He walked past me to the door, stopped with his hand on the frame, and pressed his palm to the wood just above the knob. He closed his eyes like a person smelling bread they've waited all day for. "You found us a place," he said. "God, you finally did." "This is not a place," I said, but it sounded weak even to me. He opened his eyes. Their color was my color in brighter light. "I have class," he said gently. "You should go. Close the door after. You always close doors after." The navy blanket twitched. In its fold, something small wriggled. A sound, quick and uncertain, came from under it. I pulled the blanket back without intending to. A pigeon crouched there, neck iridescent, head bobbing. It hopped once and looked me straight in the eye. When I was 19, a pigeon had flown into my dorm room and refused to leave for hours, strutting along my windowsill as if it owned lattices and ledges. I had laughed and called it Professor. The house had found the smallest things and put them in place with a kinder precision than I could bear. "I can't stay," I said to both of them. "I can't keep watching versions of rooms with versions of me." He nodded. "Then stop opening doors." He lifted his hand and tapped the hollow of my throat with 2 fingers. That's your door. It opens when you say yes. It locks when you say no. I stared at him. When did you get so wise? He snorted. We've always been this dumb. Wisdom is just dumbness with better lighting. The window brightened. Not sunlight. Television glow. The way morning cartoons used to billboard their cheerfulness onto walls that should have belonged to adults. I realized then that the room had been taking back its power, stealing color from my face to feed its own story. If I stayed a moment longer, it would learn my new habits and make a home of them. I'm leaving, I said, and backed into the hall. Do not follow me. He grinned. It's still me you're talking to. In the corridor, the wallpaper had changed again. Now it was the cheap beige of an apartment I'd rented with someone who scented her pillowcases with lavender and then left, taking the couch but not the debt collectors. At the far end, a door I knew too well stood open onto a tiny kitchen with 2 broken tiles by the sink. A version of me clattered there, back to me, talking to a person I had loved badly. The urge to step in and say I'm sorry the way the present can never apologize to the past tore at my chest. I turned left instead, toward the stairs. The house had kindly arranged for there to be stairs where they had not been a minute before. Halfway down, my foot met a step that didn't exist. I pitched forward and caught the railing with a grip that wrenched my shoulder. Something on the landing breathed. I thought it was the radiator until it whispered, lazy and amused. You keep expecting things to be where you last honored them. Save the lines, I said, gasping. Write them on the inside of a bowl and give yourself cereal. The breathing laughed. The sound skittered down the banister like a dropped coin. It had my shape in it, but older than 19 and younger than now. The age I'd been when I said yes to a job and meant it, when the people at the office had decided to find out what I could be used for. You want to see me? I asked the landing. I am seeing you, the house said gently, and this time it did not bother borrowing my voice. The second floor ended in a new hallway, narrower, with a sag in the floor where a dresser had sat for a decade, in a different life. 4 doors on the left, 4 on the right, all open just enough to suggest manners. The smell was hospital and winter and lemon cleaning spray. The night I'd slept on a hospice cot and counted seconds between breaths while my phone buzzed with someone else's needs. I went to shut the nearest door, and a hand darted from the gap, my hand, and took mine the way I take hot plates from waiters to feel useful. Skin against skin, temperature correct, grip pragmatic. I yanked back and slammed that door. It opened again, apologetic. The house did not believe me when I said no. It had years of evidence to the contrary. You can't keep every room, I said. Even museums close wings. The ceiling ticked, a heat pipe expanding with a sense of humor. We keep what you leave. You leave more than you think, often while claiming to keep. I put my forehead against the cool paint and let the ache in my shoulder become a reason to stay still. What do you want? The answer came like weather through a screen. To be full. Of what? Stupid question. I knew the answer. You, the house said, as if saying hunger in the shape of my name. I turned. At the end of the corridor, another door had opened. It was not any room I recognized. It was a long, narrow space with a single window at the far end, and a desk beneath it, and a chair facing the window, as though it had been set up to witness an execution. The light on the desk was the color of late afternoon when you've worked through lunch and the world punishes you by being beautiful outside the glass. On the desk sat a small tape recorder, the cheap kind that eats tapes and calls it the price of memory. I walked toward it because I am perverse, and the house had learned that too. Each step sounded like someone else took it a second after I did. When I reached the desk, the recorder clicked on without a hand. My voice came out of it, thinner, breathless, the way it gets when I think I'm confessing, and I am actually rehearsing guilt. I thought if I arranged it differently, the recorder me said, if I split the rooms by topic, It would become manageable. Love in this hall, regret by the back staircase, birthday rooms on the third floor. But the house speaks theory and answers with architecture. It took my categories and added wings, a basement level I don't have a flashlight for, a cupola to watch me rearrange myself. You cannot curate yourself, not when you are also the museum. The tape clicked, a tiny gear inside reset. I waited for more. The window brightened, a cloud moving. My hands rested on the desk, and the grain of the wood remembered when I had loved wooden things like they could teach me to last. You made this? I asked the air. You? The house hummed. The tone moved through the desk into my fingers. You do not remember everything. We keep this too. It pressed a weight into my mind then, like a hand urging sleep. A day surfaced. Not 19, not office, not hospice. A day I had not catalogued because I had believed it minor. I had walked home in a storm, and the rain had found its way down the back of my collar in a cold line, and I had laughed alone on a block with cracked sidewalks because the weather had won, and it felt honest to be on the losing side. I had promised myself I would keep that laugh, and I had not. The house had. You can have it, I said. Keep the lost things. Keep the small good. I don't need to hold them all. I'm not coming back to collect. The recorder clicked on by itself. You always come back to collect, my voice said, even and tired. You call it closure and you think it is a door. It is a hallway. Every hallway ends in a room you didn't mean to enter. This is a threat, I said. This is a layout, the house corrected. Threats are what you hear when you don't like where the hall goes. I picked up the recorder. It was heavier than it looked. On the back, someone, me, if the humor tracked, had labeled it with masking tape. Notes for when you get wise. Underneath, in smaller letters, you won't. I'm leaving, I said again, not because it had worked, but because repetition is a spell, and I had run out of others. Leave then, the house said, so mild it made my teeth hurt. I walked the hall, shutting doors as I went. I didn't look inside. That was the only way. Don't look, and the house has to spend something to make you see. Make it pay with time. Make it invest. Doors closed with the small, polite noise of a room that knows it has you anyway. At the stairs, the air thinned, then thickened, then decided to be normal, the way an elevator does when it's about to open onto a lobby you have earned with patience. The front door waited at the bottom. It should not have been there. It had been gone for days. It stood now, pale glass, brass handle, the outside world beyond it, street, thin sunlight, my car, code on the passenger seat where I'd thrown it. I did not trust it any more than a dry well. I set my hand gingerly on the knob. It turned. Of course, I said softly. Of course you make it easy when you think I won't go. I never thought you wouldn't go, the house replied, and this time it sounded like every version of me at once. Child, student, worker, mourner, harmonized into a tone that was not music. I think you will come back. I opened the door. Air that had not belonged to the house touched my face and felt like a hand that had missed me without making a show of it. I stepped onto the porch. The boards didn't groan. The steps down to the walk still leaned. The maple across the street moved its leaves in a wind that did not have to ask permission. I kept my eyes on the car. The key in my hand remembered how to be useful. I put one foot on the path, then two, then three, and a door opened behind me somewhere upstairs with a sigh that sounded like an apology practiced too long in the mirror. I did not turn. The car unlocked. A small triumph, obscene in its smallness. I put my hand on the handle and paused because something in me insisted on caution when I could least afford it. Before I go, I said, not looking back, how many of me are behind your doors? Silence, long enough that I thought the house might decline to answer. Then all the ones you didn't finish. My throat tightened. How many is that? The correct question, the house said, amused. is how many you will decide were unfinished once you have been gone a while. I opened the car door. The interior smelled like old coffee and the orange I had left in the cup holder 3 days ago, already softening into a scent I identify with failure. It was the best smell in the world. I got in. I put the key in the ignition. The engine turned over without drama. In the rearview mirror, the house was a house, 2 stories, shutters, roof in need of love. The front door stood open a few inches, admitting that I had left without declaring it. The upstairs window over the porch showed its reflection of the maple, which had not been invited into any room I had seen. Normal, ordinary, a real estate photo's idea of a home. I put the car in drive. The tires rolled. The house did not chase me. It didn't need to. It had laid down its roads inside me. At the end of the block there was a stop sign I did not remember, not because it was new, but because I had not paid attention. I stopped too hard. The recorder on the seat beside me slid and thumped against my thigh. I had forgotten I was carrying it. I picked it up to put it in the glove box, a little laugh at my own superstition already forming, and it clicked on. My voice, older than 19 and younger than now, came out. When you go, go quickly. Don't take keepsakes. They are handles the house can use. I stared at the recorder, thumb hovering over the stop button that did not exist on this model. The light at the intersection changed. A horn behind me asked if the present might be allowed to proceed. I'll mail it back, I told the recorder, as if the house accepted postage due. No forwarding address. The recorder spoke again, less a voice now than a room speaking through a throat. You will come back. Bring something we don't have yet. I put the recorder on the passenger side floor and drove. The street opened. The city remembered me. The noise did the first kind thing noise has ever done, and drowned out the sound of my name being used by something that knew it better than I did. I did not look in the mirror again until I had crossed 2 neighborhoods and a bridge and a river that had opinions about who should cross it in November. When I looked, I did not see the house. Of course I didn't. Distance is a trick of air. I saw my face, more tired than it had any business being at this hour, in the seat behind me, and a jacket I had forgotten I owned. At a red light, I pulled into a grocery store lot and parked. I took the recorder out and wrapped it in the jacket and shoved it deep into the trunk, as if muffling would matter. When I slammed the trunk, the sound was a door shutting in a different hallway. My skin prickled. I told myself it was the wind. I got a motel room with a door that opened onto the parking lot, and a bedspread that had been washed enough times to forget the colors it once had. The lock turned in a way that felt like honest labor. I showered in water that did not remember any other sink. I slept with the television on, because in cheap rooms the television is a ward. I woke at 2 in the morning to someone walking past my door, and the sensation of an upstairs bathroom flushing, and the sure knowledge that there was no upstairs. No corridor, no sconces, no house, I said into the thin pillow. I repeated it until the sentence lost grammar and became breath. I slept again after 4. When I woke the second time, the light was a color that wants to be called morning. On the motel desk, the little complimentary notepad had a new page on top. My handwriting on it. Too neat. Not mine. It said, bring a room. I laughed. It sounded like a person trying not to cry. I folded the note and put it in my pocket and checked out. The clerk didn't look up. The road out of town looked like roads look when days decide to run in front of you and see if you can catch them. In the afternoon, I pulled into the driveway of the house without meaning to. I had planned to leave town. I had set it as a promise to a car that could not care. Yet here I was, maple, porch, door still ajar by that small, infuriating fraction. The place looked patient. It had stood for 100 years before me. It would stand 100 after. I could spend the rest of my life refusing to look, and it would win because it had practice. I got out. I stood at the foot of the steps and spoke like a person who knows apologies are another kind of key. I'm not bringing you anything, I said. I'm not curating. I am not a museum. The house accepted this with the generosity of a rich person. Windows stayed windows. Nothing leaned closer. Somewhere inside, one of my doors shut. Not soft, not gentle. Final. Good, I said, because I needed to be the kind of person who liked what he had just heard. Good. I turned to get back in the car. The trunk was open. The jacket had shifted. The recorder lay on top, unwrapped, small and black and patient. Its red light blinked once like an eye that had chosen to be polite. It clicked on. You will bring a room, my voice said, as if reporting rather than threatening. It will be the one where you finally say no and mean it. We don't have that one yet. I stared at it for a long minute. The maple made leaf noise that refused to become meaning. The house breathed like weather. I picked up the recorder and felt its weight and found that my hand was steady. Then you can build it, I said. You like construction. Build that room. Use the hallway where I walked away. Use the door I closed. The recorder was quiet. The house made no case. I put the recorder back in the trunk, closed it carefully, and this time locked it. I got in the car and drove away. I did not look back. I did not make a ceremony of not looking back. At the edge of town, the road widened and became a thing meant for more than one person's decision. I let it carry me. In the rear view, the sky gathered a color I could not name without making a fool of myself. I'm not bringing you anything, I said again, aloud, into a car that did not deserve the intimacy. I meant it enough that the sentence did not have to be said twice. Miles later, at a gas station with coffee that tasted like someone had taught water to remember beans, I bought another notebook. On the first page I wrote, I am not a house. I tore the page out and wrote it again, uglier. I tore that one out too and wrote, I am a person who closes doors. When I got back on the highway, an exit sign slid past for a town that had nothing to do with any of my rooms. I took it anyway. The road into it did not try to become a metaphor. I parked by a river and let wind shred every sentence I had planned to say. I breathed like I could spend air and somehow pay the world back. That night, in a motel that had a painting of a sailboat attempting optimism, I dreamed of a hallway. Of course I did, but this one had windows down its length, open, with screens that had the good sense to keep moths out. At the end was a door. I knew what would be behind it. I opened it anyway. It was a room with nothing in it but a chair. The chair faced me. It did not invite. It did not accuse. It kept its shape. I sat. The house will build this, I thought. It will build it badly. It will get the angle wrong. It will make the chair face the wrong way. I will know the difference. I will keep walking. When I woke, wind was pressing the motel curtains against the open window like a cat. The recorder in the trunk did not click. The note in my pocket weighed less than paper usually does. I lay still and watched ordinary light move across an ordinary ceiling. The house would remember me. That is what houses do. I would remember myself. That is what bodies must learn to do when buildings get ambitious. I brushed my teeth. I made a list that did not include the words bring or return. I drove to a town where no one knew the version of me that liked to live inside corridors. I did not buy a map. The first night in the new place, the upstairs hall had 3 doors, one of them a bathroom. The second night, there were still 3. On the third, a fourth appeared at the end, a closet that smelled faintly of cedar and past owners. I laughed out loud, tired as brick. No, I said, with the voice you use on a friendly dog who still thinks you might share steak. Not today. The fourth door stayed. It did not open. It will. That's what houses do. When it does, I will close it. That's what I do now. I will not count how many of me are behind it. Numbers are just doors that learn to be smug. If I hear a recorder click, I will listen. I will not repeat what it says. If I dream of a chair, I will sit only as long as I want to. I will keep walking until the hall gives up and becomes a room with windows on both sides, and beyond the windows a street, and on that street a tree, and under that tree a person who looks tired and chooses to walk on anyway. When the house breathes, and it will, because houses always breathe, I will recognize the sound and refuse to mistake it for my own. The first week after I left, I did nothing but walk, not through corridors or stairwells that changed when I blinked, but through streets with cracked sidewalks, alleys that stank of garbage, riverbanks that carried the same current day after day. I walked until my feet blistered, until my socks stiffened with sweat, until my legs shook when I sat down. I slept in motels where the doors opened outward and the windows looked at parking lots, and I made sure to leave the curtains open so I could see cars come and go. It was my proof that the world outside me still existed and did not belong to the house. The first time I dreamt of it again, I told myself it was only memory. That's how trauma works, right? You wake with your heart pounding and your mouth dry, and your mind insists the place is still under your skin, but really, it's just your brain recycling fear. But when I sat up, the motel lamp flickered, and when I reached for my notebook, the one I'd bought at the gas station, the page I'd left blank was filled with words in my handwriting, words I hadn't written. 3 doors tonight. Don't open the middle. I ripped the page out, shoved it in the trash can, and wrote over the next page in block letters, "Not me." Then I underlined it until the pen cut through. The second week, the house found new tricks, not in dreams, but in daylight. I'd be walking down a street in a town I didn't know and notice a door, a simple door, in a brick wall, or beside a diner, or leaning against the side of an old gas station. Always locked, always ordinary, except I'd walk past it the next day and it would be gone, replaced by blank wall or weeds. The first few times I convinced myself I was losing my grip, but once, outside a laundromat, a kid dropped his soda and it rolled to one of those doors. He bent to pick it up, then frowned. He reached for the knob. I shouted before I could stop myself. He looked at me, startled, then at the blank wall where the door had been. His soda fizzed at his shoes. By the third week, I stopped pretending I was free. The recorder in my trunk had not clicked since the last night I'd spoken to it. Sometimes I forgot it was there. Sometimes I thought I did. But one morning, when I opened the trunk for my backpack, the recorder sat on top again, no jacket hiding it. The red light blinked twice, not on, not off, waiting. I slammed the trunk. I drove west, then south, then west again, tracing a path that had no pattern but distance. In a diner outside a desert town, I sat with eggs cooling on the plate and heard a voice behind me order coffee. My voice, the waitress wrote it down like nothing was wrong. I turned in my seat so fast the fork clattered. A man sat at the counter, his shoulders narrow, his hair cropped short, his jawline mine from a decade ago. He didn't look at me. He stirred his coffee. He reached into his pocket and took out a notebook, spiral bound, scarred at the edges, and began to write. I stood. My chair screeched. The waitress shot me a look that asked me not to make trouble. When I blinked, the stool was empty. The eggs were stone cold. I left money on the table and drove without stopping for 5 hours. The desert stretched wide and silent. The horizon was empty. Yet in the rear view, I saw a house once, standing alone against the skyline, its windows black. I swore it leaned closer each time I checked. I told myself I would never go back. Not to that street, not to that porch, not to the patient front door. But the house had other ways to find me. In the 4th week, I dreamed of people I had loved, not them as they were, but them in rooms they had never entered. My mother in a hallway lined with photographs of me that did not exist. A friend sitting at a kitchen table with doors on every wall, staring at me like I had abandoned them. An old lover lying on a bedspread that rippled as though water flowed beneath it. Each one looked at me with the same expression, recognition mixed with accusation. When I woke, my pillow was wet with tears. I hadn't felt myself cry. On the motel desk, my notebook lay open, and across 2 pages, in handwriting that almost matched mine but leaned too far left, was written, "We keep them too. You left them behind, and we keep what is left." I slammed the notebook shut. The 5th week, the world outside began to stutter. I'd walk past a shop and see its display window twice, side by side, one a fraction delayed, as if the glass remembered what it had been a moment before. Streetlights flickered, not from power surges, but from hesitation, like they weren't sure which hour belonged here. And the doors, they were everywhere. Motel closets that hadn't been there yesterday, gas station bathrooms that opened onto halls too long for the building. The house was spreading, not waiting. One night, I pulled off the highway to sleep in the car at a rest stop. Safer, I thought. No rooms, no walls, no chance. I woke in the small hours to the sound of breathing inside the car. Not mine. Slow, steady, patient. I turned my head inch by inch, terrified of what I would see. Nothing, except when I checked the mirror, the back seat wasn't empty. A shadow sat there, upright, still. My shape, my outline, but darker, thicker, like something pressed from ink. I whipped around. Nothing there. Back to the mirror. The shadow still sat, hands folded, head tilted slightly, watching me. I drove with the lights off for 20 miles before I dared stop. By the 6th week, I was unraveling. Food tasted of dust. People's words slipped from my ears before they reached my mind. When I tried to call an old friend, the line crackled, and instead of ringing, I heard the slow creak of a door opening. I hung up. That night, I dreamed not of rooms, but of the house itself. I stood outside, staring at its walls. It was taller now, 5 stories, then 6, then 7, swelling like lungs. Windows opened and shut in unison, like eyes blinking. The front door yawned wide, and from inside came 100 versions of my own voice, all speaking at once. "We are ready. Come home." I woke with the recorder on the pillow beside my head. I hadn't taken it from the trunk. Its red light blinked. It clicked on, and my voice, one of the many, whispered, "Every road leads back. You can't drive far enough to change the floor plan." I hurled it against the wall. Plastic cracked, batteries spilled, but when I bent to pick it up, the recorder was whole again. The light blinked. Waiting, the 7th week, I stopped running, not because I wasn't afraid, because I was tired. Tired of motels with thin walls, tired of writing words in notebooks that changed when I blinked, tired of doors in places they shouldn't be, shadows and mirrors that matched me too closely. I drove back. The car seemed to know the way. I didn't follow a map. I didn't check road signs. The tires found turns on their own, and the horizon began to look familiar. When the house finally rose in front of me, it wasn't a surprise. It hadn't grown taller, not this time. It was the same 2-story place, shutters sagging, paint peeling, the porch light long dead. Ordinary, patient, the front door still open by a sliver. I sat in the car with the engine idling and stared. My chest ached, my shoulder throbbed, my hands shook on the wheel. Then I turned the key, killed the engine, and stepped out. The air smelled of rain, though the sky was clear. Leaves scraped the street. The porch creaked under my weight, familiar as breath. I put my hand on the knob. It was warm, almost feverish. The house sighed. Not the wood, not the wind, the house. And then, in my own voice, very close, it whispered, "Welcome back." The knob turned under my hand, like it had been waiting for skin. The door swung inward without complaint, and the smell rose up to meet me. Old wood, damp plaster, the faint sweetness of dust that has learned the names of the people it coats. For a moment, standing on the threshold, I felt the old habit return, the impulse to inventory, to catalog, to make a map in my head and believe the map would save me. I closed my eyes and let the impulse pass like a wave. When I opened them, I stepped inside without counting anything. The entryway looked the same as the day I fled. Same mirror with the foxed silvering, same low table with the glass ring in its finish, where a previous tenant had set down a sweating glass and not wiped it. But the air had weight. It pressed against me, the way a crowded room does, bodies close enough that you have to turn sideways just to breathe. I shut the door behind me. It closed with a sound that made my shoulder blade twitch, the memory of a hand landing between my ribs when I wasn't ready. "Welcome back," the house said again, and this time the voice didn't bother with my mouth as its instrument. It was in the boards, the walls, the hairs along my forearms. "We kept everything." "I noticed," I said. My voice didn't shake. There are levels of fear past shaking, where the body grows careful and the mind becomes a small desk with a single piece of paper on it. The hallway to the kitchen stretched longer than it ever should have. I could see the window at the far end, a slab of dull light. As I walked, doors eased themselves wider on either side, gracious as a host. I didn't look in. The house coughed once when I passed the stairwell, as if reminding me of the second floor's existence. Later, I told it, and the house laughed like pipes settling. In the kitchen, the clock over the stove still had no hands. The refrigerator hummed steadily in a room without power. On the table sat the tape recorder. I had left it in the trunk. Here it was, centered on the wood like an altar. "Of course," I said. "Of course you brought it in." "It brought itself," the house replied, prim. "Tools prefer to be used." The recorder clicked on. My voice, not mine, cleared my throat. "We agree," it said. "No more curating, no more souvenirs, no more rooms unless the door opens from your side." I pulled a chair back and sat. It didn't try to keep me. The recorder's red eyes stared. I stared back. "You said you wanted something we don't have yet," the house murmured. "You made a promise to yourself on a highway wrist deep in exhaustion. You said you would bring us the room where you say no, and mean it. We like collections to be complete." My fingers pressed flat on the table. The wood was warm, a fever running under varnish. "I'm not bringing you anything. You already did," the house said. I could hear the smile. "You came." The doors in the hall flexed, a collective exhale. Far away, a sink turned on and off without water. I stood, pushing the chair back until its legs squealed on the floor. The sound had the quality of being written down somewhere with the wrong adjective. "Let's finish it," I said, "if that's the game." In the entryway mirror, my reflection was 10 minutes late and breathing too fast. I didn't look at him again. I took the stairs. They behaved like stairs. Left turn at the landing. 12 up, 6 over. 12 up, there you are. The house didn't try to stretch them under my feet. It knew better. It had learned me well enough to understand which tricks I had grown bored with. The second floor corridor had my old floral wallpaper again, torn at the seam near the baseboard. Doors on both sides, as before. Every one ajar, as before. At the far end, the new door, the one the house had conjured after I left, stood half open, the gap too exact to be an accident. Light spilled out in a ribbon across the floor, thin and patient. "You can show me all of them," I told the house, and my voice surprised me by sounding not brave but bored. 19, 24, 31, the versions you think I'll want to rescue, the rooms I built with my bad decisions and worse apologies. I know the trick now. It isn't a trick, the house said. It's a method. I walked past a door and caught a slant of myself at a cheap desk, shoulders up around my ears, typing an email that could have been written kinder. I did not stop. Another door showed me asleep in a patch of sun on a couch that had not deserved the effort it took to carry it up a flight of stairs. I did not stop. Another, me holding a hand and pretending to be brave in a hospital room that smelled like lemon cleaning spray in the end of a particular world. I paused there long enough to bow my head. Then I kept going. Not rescuing, I said to the house. Not repenting. Not revisiting. We end this in a room with a chair. The new door's light lay across my shoes. I stepped through. The room was smaller than I expected. No tricks of perspective. No false angles. Just four walls painted a white so plain it felt like an insult. A single window that looked on nothing but light, and a chair in the middle. No desk. No tape recorder. No photographs. No souvenirs. A room like a held breath. Sit, the house said, pleased. This is the one we built from the promise you made when you were far away. We used the words that taste of metal. We used the refusal you spoke and thought no one was listening. I knew you were listening, I said, and sat. The chair didn't try to keep me. It pressed into my shoulders like any chair does, asking only that I acknowledge its shape. I put my hands on my knees. The house waited, the way a crowd waits for music to start. Say it, the house whispered. Say no and mean it. Fine, I said. No. The word landed on the floor and didn't bounce. It lay there like a coin in thick carpet. Quickly parted the room. You'll have to do better, the house said. Of course I will, I said. You've heard me say no to fevers and debts and people who wanted me in a shape I couldn't afford. You know the difference. Then mean it, the house purred. I closed my eyes. I thought of the first door that had never been there, and then I thought of the front door vanishing when I needed it. I thought of the way the house could shape wallpaper into my childhood and photographs into a past I wanted to lean against. I thought of the recorder's blink. I thought of the long road out and the shorter road back. No, I said again, and this time I said it to myself. The room changed temperature by a degree the body knows without knowing. The light through the window shifted half a shade. Somewhere down the hall, a door protested softly and then accepted an outcome. The house was quiet a long time. When it spoke at last, it didn't use my voice or the desk or the pipes. It used the space between my ribs. You'll come back, it said. Not quite complaint, not quite prophecy. You're a creature with walking in your bones and leaving in your mouth and rooms in your pockets. You'll bring us something. I will, I said, but not what you want. I'll bring you the sound of a footstep that doesn't pause in thresholds. I'll bring you a door closed on purpose without rehearsal. We keep everything, the house warned, like a law read aloud in a courtroom where the judge is also the gallery. You can keep it, I said. You just don't get to write it. The chair under me approved by having no opinion. The light in the window brightened. For a second I imagined I could see outside, a street that belonged to weather, a tree that could not be convinced to grow roots in a hallway. The room refused to be a metaphor for longer than a breath. It returned to being a room. The door behind me nudged itself a fraction wider, an invite, not a trap. The house could learn, or it could pretend. I turned my head and looked over my shoulder. The corridor waited, expectant as a host unsure which story to tell next. I'm leaving the door open, I told the house. You can close it when I'm gone, or not, but I'm not curating your endings anymore. And if we open new ones, the house asked lightly, if we line your horizon with doors that look like opportunities, grievances, second chances, apologies, instructions, relief, I will walk past them, I said, or I will not. But either way, I won't call it destiny when it's only architecture. The house considered. In the pipes, a bubble popped. In the wall, A seam exhaled. All the versions you left, it said softly. All the rooms you mislaid. What will you do with them, if not save them? Let them finish without me, I said. Saying it hurt in the place you press with a fist when you have eaten too fast and regret doing it alone. Let them be rooms I pass in a memory and nod at like neighbors. Let them be true without being current. And if one calls your name, I will answer from the hall, I said, not from the threshold. That is not a satisfying ending, the house mused. That is not an ending, I said. That's how living works. The recorder clicked in the kitchen below, as if its own unseen hand had agreed to minutes. The front door's hinges whispered something that might have been grievance and might have been oil. You will always be ours, the house said suddenly, childish, dangerous. We have your handprints in paint. We have your sweat in the joists. We have the echo of your foot on the seventh stair. We have the air you didn't use. You have all of that, I said. You can keep it. You do not have my next hour. The house was very quiet then, quiet in the way a big animal rests the pads of its paws on the earth and waits to see if you will run. I stood. The chair made the small sound chairs make when they have done nothing wrong. I left it facing the window. In the corridor, doors breathed. One closed gently, as if embarrassed to have been caught staring. Another opened a hair, and then thought better of it. The stairwell yawned like a mouth. On the landing, I paused. A door that had not been there an hour ago stood under the little window, like a dog trying a new trick. It had no knob, only a keyhole shaped like nothing a locksmith would endorse. I reached into my pocket and found nothing. No key, no recorder, no talisman, not today. I told that door and smiled at the small cruelty of giving myself the last word. The door's wood flushed a shade darker, like a face taught to be poker still. I took the stairs. The first floor met me like a place that had earned a right to behave. The recorder on the kitchen table sat quiet, its red eye dark. I picked it up. It was heavier than before because I was less willing to carry it. At the front door, I paused with my hand on the knob. The house breathed in. I breathed out. I'll visit, I said, to compromise with the parts of me that like prayers and the parts that need bargains. Not to bring, not to take, to look at the porch and remember that I have a spine. You always had one, the house said, and for once the affection in its voice did not make my teeth ache. I pulled the door open. Air came in. Old dust went out. I stepped onto the porch, and then to the steps, and then to the walk, and then to the street. I didn't look back until I had my hand on the car door. When I did, the house stood where it had stood, unembarrassed to be itself. In the rear view as I drove away, the upstairs window reflected the maple. A light moved behind it, the way light moves when it remembers people even after they have left. The recorder on the passenger seat clicked once, a sound like a throat preparing to speak, and then deciding the silence is the more accurate sentence. I rolled the window down and let wind lay its hand on my face. At the end of the block, the stop sign waited. I stopped, not too hard, not to perform for a lesson. On the curb, a kid balanced on a scooter and watched me like people watch a person who is either about to do something foolish or about to do something worth learning from. I waved him across. He pushed off, wobbling, grinning when he didn't fall. The grin pulled something in my chest into a better shape. I drove all afternoon, not fleeing, not returning, doing the third thing. Night crept up along the roadside like a modest animal. I checked into a motel that had a painting of a river, not anywhere near here. The lock turned the way a lock should. I set the recorder on the dresser and stacked a phone book on top of it as a joke for myself in the house, which appreciates ritual even when it pretends not to. I slept. At 2 a.m, I woke from a dream about a hallway with windows on both sides and a chair in the last room facing the wrong way. The wrongness didn't bother me. The door had been open. The chair had been empty. In the dream, I had closed the door, gently, just once, so it would know it could do the same. I listened. No hum, no pipes rehearsing words with their tiny mouths, no doors turning in their sleep, just the small noises the world makes when no one is rehearsing it for a story. I got up and drank water from the bathroom tap, which tasted like metal and travel and forgiveness. I wrote a sentence in the new notebook by the bed. I am a person who walks past open doors. I underlined it once. I turned off the lamp. From the dresser, under the phone book, the recorder clicked. The red eye glowed to the ceiling. My voice came out, ordinary, as if spoken into someone's shoulder. "We won't be done," it said. "Houses never are." "Good," I said into the dark, because I meant it. "Then neither am I. In the morning, I will drive, not away from anything, toward a set of blocks where the halls are made of air and the doors are the kind no house can learn to own. If the house raises a door for me on a street I haven't walked yet, I will decide then. That is the room I am bringing it, whether it manages to keep it or not. At the next red light, I will count my breaths, not to prove I exist, to appreciate the architecture. I will laugh when the count goes wrong. That sound will belong to the day. The house can remember it if it wants. It can shelf it and dust it and show it to me someday behind a door when I am tired enough to be fooled. I will nod to it like a neighbor and carry on down the hall to the room with windows on both sides, and maybe that day the chair will face the street, and maybe it won't, and both ways will be a kind of grace. Now, on to the next story. The first night it happened, I didn't notice. Not really. I'd been half drunk at Billy's, listening to his uncle's stories about the old mine collapse, and by the time I stumbled back to my apartment over on Pine, my eyes were already closing. The digital clock by my bed glared 3:03 a.m. when I collapsed onto the mattress. The red numbers blurred into each other. I don't remember anything else. The second night, I woke with a start. Same clock, same time, 3:03 a.m. I sat up, heart racing, unsure why I'd opened my eyes in the first place. The apartment was silent, except for the hum of the fridge. I told myself it was nothing, laid back down, and slept until morning. It was the third night when I noticed the change. I woke at 3:03 again, no reason, just as though someone had shaken me awake. The air felt heavier than it should, like a storm pressing against the roof. I sat there in the dark and told myself it was in my head, but when I looked out the window toward the corner of Pine and Willow, the street was wrong. The corner store Garrity's, with the ugly green awning that had been there my whole life, was gone. In its place stood a brick building with narrow windows, taller than anything else on the block. The sign over the door read Wren's Books, letters painted in white that glowed faintly in the dark, though no light touched them. I stared until my eyes watered. I thought maybe Garrity finally sold the place. Maybe they built it overnight. Maybe I'm drunk again. But none of those were true. Garrity had died years ago, and his son ran the store stubbornly, refusing every buyout. You don't tear down a shop and raise a 3-story bookstore in a single day. By morning, everyone acted like Wren's Books had always been there. I asked Billy if he remembered Garrity's, and he frowned at me. That old dump with the gas pumps out front? They tore that down when we were kids. He shook his head. You're mixing it up with the station over on 4th. I shut up after that. The fourth night, I stayed awake on purpose. I brewed coffee, paced the apartment, kept my eyes on the clock. When it struck 3:03, I swear I heard something move. Not in my apartment, not in the hall, but everywhere, like the entire town took one giant step sideways. When I looked out the window, Willow Street stretched farther than it should. It used to dead end into the field behind the high school. Now it kept going, lined with houses I'd never seen. The streetlights hummed faintly, new and sharp, not the old buzzing orange lamps we'd had forever. I walked out there at dawn. The houses were neat. Identical ranch-style homes with tidy lawns and white fences, the kind of houses people posed in front of for magazines. I counted 20 of them before the street curved into a cul-de-sac I knew wasn't on any map. People were mowing lawns, pulling trash cans to the curb, waving at each other like they'd been neighbors for years. When I asked one man how long he'd lived there, he laughed. Since they built it, he said, like it was obvious, back in the 80s. I checked the county records later that day. No Willow extension, no cul-de-sac, just the field behind the school. The fifth night, I thought maybe I'd dreamed it. Maybe I'd fallen asleep without noticing, lost an hour, hallucinated the change. But when the clock hit 3:03, I saw it happen. The street outside shifted. That's the only word. The light bent, the houses stretched, and then with a sound like someone inhaling, the world snapped into a new shape. When I pressed my face to the window, Pine Street had a church at the corner that hadn't been there before. Tall, white, with a bell tower pointing a finger at the stars. The sign out front said First Congregation of the Eternal Dawn. The doors were open. Inside, a faint orange glow flickered like firelight. I didn't go in. The sixth night, I did more than watch. I stepped outside. The air tasted different, heavy, metallic, sharp as blood. I walked down Pine with my hands shaking, staring at buildings I half recognized. Mrs. Pollard's bakery was still there, but the name over the door was different. Pollard and Sons. She never had sons. Her only daughter died when we were teenagers. Yet when I stepped inside, the shelves were full of bread, and a young man with her eyes stood behind the counter, smiling like he'd been there all his life. I didn't buy anything. When I got home, the clock said 3:05. I blinked and the world felt ordinary again. By the seventh night, I was terrified to sleep. I stopped pretending I could treat it like a coincidence after the seventh night. No one builds churches overnight. No one resurrects sons who never lived. Something was happening to the town, and it wasn't construction or memory or anything people could explain with zoning laws or family trees. I stayed up again. When the clock hit 3:03, I braced myself for the sound, and it came, that sucking inhale, like the air itself remembered lungs. The world flickered. For a split second, everything doubled, and I swear I saw the bones of the old town bleeding through the new one, Garrity's corner store, and the dusty empty field, and the orange streetlights buzzing weakly. Then it all snapped back, and the new shapes were permanent. This time, the diner was gone. O'Hara's, where I'd eaten Sunday breakfast with my parents every week until they moved away, where I'd had first dates, last dates, drunk nights, hungover mornings. The booth by the window where the vinyl was torn, gone. In its place was a glass front building with sleek lines, the kind of cafe you only see in bigger cities. The sign said Bean Ritual. I went in. The air smelled sharp, bitter, clean. The counters were stainless steel. The servers wore matching aprons and asked if I wanted oat milk or almond milk. I asked them what happened to O'Hara's. A barista tilted her head at me, puzzled, like I'd asked what happened to the sun. O'Hara's? Was that in another town? No, I said, my throat dry. It was here, the diner, this building. She smiled like she was humoring me. This place has always been here. I've worked here since high school. But I recognized her, Katie Holloway. She'd been 2 years behind me. Her dad had run the gas station by the highway. She shouldn't have been here. She'd moved away for college, never came back. Yet here she was, pouring espresso like it was the only thing she'd ever done. I left without drinking the coffee. By the 8th night, the resets started taking people I knew. At 3:03, the sound came again, deeper this time, like the whole town's lungs were swelling. I sat on my bed and stared out the window as the world rippled. When it settled, the house across the street was gone, not changed, gone. The lawn stretched empty to the corner. I sat there until dawn, stomach twisting. When I finally went outside, I walked across the lot where the house had been. The grass looked freshly cut. The earth was smooth, like no foundation had ever been dug. I stood there, dizzy, trying to remember the name of the family that had lived there. It was on the tip of my tongue. A father, a mother, two little girls who rode bikes in the street. I saw them in my head, their faces blurred, their laughter carried on the summer air. But when I tried to say their name, nothing came out. At work that day, no one else remembered them either. I asked Sharon in accounts if she knew who lived across from me. She frowned, thinking, wasn't it always just a lot? No, I insisted. There was a family, two girls. She looked at me with pity. Maybe you're thinking of somewhere else. That night, I sat at my window, watching the empty lot. I promised myself I wouldn't forget again. I whispered what little I could remember. Two girls, bikes, laughter, over and over like a prayer. When the clock hit 3:03, the air shifted again. I clung to the memory as if holding it tight would anchor it. But when the reset ended, the lot was no longer empty. A tall apartment building stood there now, 5 stories of brick and glass. People bustled in and out, carrying grocery bags, walking dogs. The family was gone. My memory was fog. I couldn't hold it. By the 9th night, the resets came with sounds inside my apartment. A knock on the wall, a footstep in the kitchen, whispers under the floorboards. I got up and walked room to room, heart hammering. Nothing, but the clock still hit 3:03, and the world still shifted, and the whispers sounded like voices saying names I'd once known. I started writing everything down, every building, every face, every street. I filled notebooks with maps and lists. I drew O'Hara's Diner, Garrity's Corner Store, the cul-de-sac that hadn't existed 2 weeks ago. I wrote down names of people who had disappeared. I thought if I kept records, I could hold the town together. The house across the street wasn't the only one that vanished. On the 10th night, the police station disappeared. In its place stood a building with black glass windows and no sign. The next morning, men in dark suits stood out front, smoking cigarettes, watching people pass. When I asked someone where the police had gone, they looked at me like I was crazy. There's never been a police station there. That's the municipal building. But where are the police? I asked. They laughed. We don't need police. We've got the watch. The watch. I saw them that night, patrolling the streets in pairs, their footsteps unnervingly synchronized. They never spoke. Their eyes glowed faintly in the dark, reflecting light like animals. On the 11th night, I tried leaving town. I packed a bag, filled the tank, and drove west. The road stretched out beneath my headlights, familiar at first, but when the clock hit 3:03, the world buckled. I swerved, slammed the brakes, heart pounding. When the car steadied, the road had changed. I was back on Main Street, in front of Wren's Books. I hadn't turned the wheel. I screamed into the empty car. By the 12th night, I realized the resets were no longer just building on the old town. They were replacing it. More and more of the original streets were gone, swallowed by new ones. The park where I'd played as a kid had become a row of identical houses. The high school was now a building with mirrored windows and a sign that read Academy of Dawn. And every day, more people I'd known my whole life disappeared from memory. I stopped asking about them. The looks I got were too sharp, too suspicious. The watch had started following me. I saw them outside my apartment at night, 2 figures standing in the shadows, not moving, just watching. By the 13th night, I wasn't sure if I'd survive. At 3:03, I sat in the dark, clutching my notebook, whispering the names of everyone I could still remember. My parents, Billy, Sharon, the Pollards. I repeated them until my throat was raw. But when the reset came, I felt something tug at the words, pulling them out of my mouth. I tried to hold on, but they slipped away. When I woke the next morning, the notebook was blank, every page white, my handwriting gone. I cried then. I hadn't cried in years. That night, I made a decision. I couldn't just sit by the window anymore. I had to find the source. The resets weren't random. Something was causing them. Something tied to the church, maybe, or the municipal building, or deeper underground. At 3:03, when the air shifted, I stepped outside and walked straight to the church. The doors were open, the orange light spilling out. Inside, rows of pews faced an altar where no cross hung, only a black mirror. People sat silently, hands folded, eyes glowing faintly like the watch outside. The preacher's voice was low, soothing, like a lullaby. I stepped closer. The mirror rippled. For an instant, I saw myself staring back, not as I was, but as I might have been, a version of me that had never noticed the resets, who sat obediently in the pews, smiling faintly. Then the glass darkened. The preacher looked at me. His eyes glowed brighter than the rest. "You should join us," he said. His voice echoed, doubled, as if spoken by more than one mouth. "You're already part of it." I turned and fled. When I got home, the clock read 3:04. I'd lost a minute, and the notebook I'd hidden under my bed was waiting on the table, open to a page that hadn't existed. On it, in handwriting I couldn't deny was mine, were 3 words: "Stay awake forever." I stopped drinking coffee after midnight because it turned my hands to stone and my thoughts to glass, and I needed both to bend. I lay on the floor with my ear to the boards and counted the ticks and thuds the building made like a sleeping animal. When the red numbers on the clock dragged themselves toward 3:03, I stood by the window with my hand on the latch. If I was going to find the center of this, I needed to catch the town mid-breath. At 3:02:58, the street was ordinary, such as ordinary had become. Wren's books glowed lightly across the way. The watch stood under the hydrangea, like statues. The air tasted of iron. At 59, the light bent. At 60, which does not exist, the whole block took a step sideways. The window latch slid in my hand. The glass flexed and went silky under my palm, and I slipped through it like a fish through weeds and stood on the fire escape in a street that wasn't quite finished yet. The world hadn't decided where to place the church. 2 versions of it lay over each other like tracing paper: the old brick building that had been a bank, and the white tower with its black mirror. The watch blurred, 2 and then 3 of them, overlapping, and then clicked into a single pair again. The air made a low sucking noise. I ran. I went for the municipal building, not because I trusted it more than the church, but because I trusted it differently. The doors were heavy, and the glass in them didn't reflect me. It reflected an empty foyer and a set of stairs going down. The watch saw me and stepped after, their boots synchronized. They didn't run. They didn't need to. At 3:03 and change, everything moved at the pace of a heartbeat you hear through a pillow. The doors were unlocked. I slipped into the foyer and past the elevator, whose light had never been turned on. A sign that hadn't been there in daylight pointed to the basement. Facilities. The letters were crisp. The arrow pointed to a door set slightly deeper than the wall could allow. I pulled. It opened onto stairs, concrete and damp, and a smell of ozone and old fabric clothes that had soaked in a tub too long and had to be rinsed until your hands went numb to get the ghost of the stink out. The watch boots clopped on the foyer floor above and paused as if agreeing among themselves whether they remembered me as a person who went up or down. I went down. There was less gravity on those stairs. My feet didn't cough up dust when they landed. The steps did not change count unless I counted them, so I didn't. The walls had no pipes, no conduit, no excuse for their existence. They were smooth as if poured in the dark. At the bottom, a corridor led away with its own light, a dull pale that made my skin look like stationery. On the left, rooms with windows so grimy they were new. On the right, doors with no labels. Every so often, a fissure ran in the concrete, not random, but like a sentence written in a language of cracks. At the end of the corridor, a door with a keypad. No numbers on it, only a rectangle of black glass, and my reflection leaning toward it like a moth. The black recognized my face and recognized nothing, both at once. The light in it pulsed. I pressed my palm to it without meaning to. It opened. Inside was a room with no dust. In the middle stood a table with a sheet of glass for a top, and under the glass a map of the town, layered on layered on layered. Past, present, a dozen possible futures like onion skins. Streets that had not been built yet lay ghostly under those that had. Houses that had never existed, stacked tidily in grids that pretended they had. In the corners, machines with bellies of spooled paper. On the wall, a clock with no hands. A soft chittering noise filled the air, as if something small and hungry was trapped in the vents. A woman stood on the other side of the table. Her hair was pinned up in the way you do when you're about to get serious work done and don't want it falling in your eyes. She wore a badge that had no name on it. When she looked at me, her eyes glowed faintly, the way the watches did, but there was an apology in the glow, like a porch light left on too long after the guests have gone. "You're early," she said, and her voice had the cadence of the preacher without the syrup. It's still choosing. "What is?" I asked, though the answer was the room. "Who are you?" "We're all facilities," she said. "We keep things running. We replace what outlives its story. We remove what can no longer carry the weight of being remembered. You know this. It's why you write in notebooks that turn white." "You did that?" I said. "You made my words go?" She shook her head. "We watch. We adjust. We smooth the edges so no one cuts themselves on the changeover. Your pages emptied because your town did. The map simply updated your record." She smiled a very small, tired smile. "It's easier when no one notices." "I noticed," I said, and slammed my palm on the glass. The layers rustled. "You're erasing people." She looked past me, as if waiting for the watch to arrive and do what they're made for. When she saw we were alone, she let the smile go. "We're not erasing, we're reallocating. The town has to survive. It requires a usable story. You've outgrown your old one. You're lucky you can see it happen. Most sleep through it. Call it what it is," I said. "Reallocating. You're starving the old town to feed the new." Something moved under the glass. A street stretched like a cat. A house sat up and looked around, and lay down again in a different block. The clock with no hands ticked anyway. "What happens at 3:03? I asked. "Why then?" She shrugged, the movement almost elegant. "Every place that lasts needs a ritual, a time to breathe, to settle, to adopt a new spine. Yours picked a minute that would leave the fewest witnesses." She glanced at the clock. "That's kindness." "Whose kindness?" I asked. "Yours? The church's? The watch? The place," she said, as if that were a person. "The town remembers itself out loud once a day, so it can keep remembering it all." I circled the table, looking for a switch, a seam, the place where the story could be levered up. "And the people who don't fit the new version of the story?" She looked at me as if to say I already knew the answer. "Sometimes they become watch. Sometimes they become nothing that needs a name." She put her hand flat on the glass above a cluster of streets near the river. Under her palm, the lines shifted. A bridge I'd never seen before appeared, and then the old iron bridge I'd driven across as a teenager flickered and dimmed. "Sometimes they learn to live under a different constellation of lamps. You'd be amazed how many do that without losing a step." "My friend?" I said, and the word tried to slide away from my mouth. I caught it. "Billy," I said. The name cut my tongue like a sharp potato chip. "He's still?" She tapped the map near Pine. He's pouring drinks at a place you haven't seen yet. He tells different stories now, but his timing's better. She tilted her head. You can go hear him tonight, if you want. Your last notes told me to stay awake forever, I said. That was you, she said gently. We didn't write it. We don't have to. People police themselves. We just move the sidewalks when everyone's done fretting. I breathed out. It fogged the glass. The map was warm to the touch. What if I break your machine? I said, not as a threat, but as the sad query of a person who knows their wrist won't budge what needs to move. She glanced at the clock with no hands. You can't end it, she said. You can only misalign it. She looked back at me. Misalignments hurt. They tear. When they tear in public, people bleed. You don't want that. Something flickered in the glass where my street should have been. The tall apartment building across from my place fuzzed. For a moment, the lot was empty again. For a moment, the original house sat back on its foundation, like a dog made to heel. For a fraction of a second, the two little girls on their bikes rode past each other in opposite directions, one laughing, one crying. The map couldn't hold them both. It chose. I watched the laughter pass through my fingertips like current and thought I might throw up. What is it becoming? I asked. This town you're feeding, what is it going to be when you're done? She looked at the church on the map as if it were a new tooth coming in. A place where no one asks what happened to the diner, she said. A place where no one requires a story older than the year that looks handsomest in photographs. A place that won't scare investors. A place that knows how to smile for a drone shot. She tilted her head, almost apologetic. It will be very livable. I don't want livable, I said. I want the park with the rusted slide and the smell of hot metal and the scrape of your shins and someone yelling again like a curse and a prayer. She nodded. Then you should write it down, somewhere we don't keep. My notebooks fail, I said. You saw to that. She shook her head. You picked the wrong container. Your hands are strong. Your mouth still knows names. Use those. The church takes names. The watch takes what the church can't swallow. We file the leftovers. If you want something to last, you have to build it where we can't reach. Where is that? I asked. She looked at my chest. Right there, and anywhere you say it to someone else. Memory in transit is hard to repossess. She smiled, and this time there wasn't much apology in it. But you can't save O'Hara's with a bedtime story. It was going down either way. The grease in those vents alone. Stop, I said. Please. We stood there, the clock ticking without hands. The watch moved quietly somewhere above. The church bell that wasn't a bell hummed and didn't ring. The machines in the corner began to chatter more intently. The map under the glass warmed an extra fraction, like bread just before it burns. You could join us, she said. She didn't make it a recruitment pitch. She made it a weather report. People who see the mechanism either break or become part of it. There's more dignity in keeping it running. If I say no, I said, does the town swallow me? If you say no and mean it, she said, you wake up where you are every day and walk until the parts you can't stand are smaller than the parts you can. She opened one hand and then closed it until you are as large as your day. I laughed. It sounded like something the town might keep if it was bored and needed a new ringtone. You said I'm early, I said. What happens if I wait here until 3:03 and stand on your map when it shifts? Her expression didn't change, but something in the room did. The air turned a degree sharper. You'll go wherever touches you, she said. If the old street touches you in that second, you'll go with it. If the new one does, you'll be paved into the new. If two things touch you at once, you'll tear. She stopped. Don't do that. I'm supposed to stop you if you try. Then don't watch, I said. Turn around and remember something easier. The clock with no hands put its hand on a shoulder I didn't have. The machines hummed like flies. Somewhere above, a window rattled. The town drew a breath. I stepped onto the glass. It didn't flex. The map pressed up into my shoes with the stubbornness of a place that refuses to be metaphor. Lines of streets met my soles and recognized them. The woman drew in her breath and let it out like a good waitress dealing with a dumb order. "You like pain too much," she said. "I like accuracy," I said. "I won't tear. I'm not important enough." "You're exactly important enough for a small rip," she said dryly, "which is the kind that rots edges for a decade. But go ahead, learn it firsthand." The room darkened as if someone had passed their hand across the face of the town. The clock that was not a clock warmed the air. The minute that doesn't exist opened its mouth. At 3:03, I felt the seams, not in the room, the town itself, every block, every curb, every doorway that had learned to be two things at once, tugged against its own new shape, and then chose. I felt pine go from 2 lanes to 1, felt the park bench go from splintered to slatted teak, felt the smell of coffee switch from bitter to bright, felt the river edge shift its rocks a finger's width. Under my shoes, my street fluttered between the empty lot and the tall building and the house. It landed on the building. It landed on the house. It landed on the lot. It landed on the building. I bent my knees like a person who knows how to ride a train in an old city and keep their balance. The map tried to take me 3 ways. None got purchased. The woman watched with her mouth a precise line. My ears filled with the sound of names said in a dozen rooms. For 1 second, I thought I could hear my own said by people who were gone or newly written. When the minute ended, I was still standing. The map settled under me on the tall building. My breath came ragged. The woman blinked and then laughed once, amazed against policy. "You arrogant idiot," she said. "You did it. You slipped. I learned that in a church," I said. "How to sit between notes and call it prayer." Above us, the town finished inhaling. The watch's boots went from synchronized to merely paired. The machines spat out a longer strip of paper with neat little graphs. The clock with no hands cooled a shade. "Now what?" I asked. "Now you leave," she said, weary, "and don't come back. Or come back and sit under the mirror and let your eyes glow. Both are allowed. Both become part of the only story that matters to a place, which is the story that keeps the property taxes paid. Will you remember this?" I asked. She tapped her forehead. "We remember the mechanism," she said, "not the people who get caught in it. Not for long. That's mercy. And me." She looked down at where my shoes had been. "You'll remember enough to ruin dinner parties and save no one," she said gently. "And maybe you'll tell one person at the right time and they'll know which door to skip. That counts. That's how towns get to keep their minor kindnesses." I stepped off the glass. My legs felt like I'd walked all night, carrying something heavy I would not set down. The woman stepped back, giving me the corridor the way you give a stranger in a hospital the space to keep their dignity while they fail in public. I went up the concrete stairs. The facility door opened for me. The foyer smelled of lemon and old shoes. Outside, the watch nodded once, tiny acknowledgments. "We saw you go where bad stories go, and come back not worse in the ways that matter." At street level, Wren's Books was still where Garrity's had been, the sign shining clean. Willow still ran to the cul-de-sac that shouldn't fit on any map. The church's black mirror caught the streetlights and made them into a river. I walked past it. The preacher watched me from the doorway, his eyes bright and busy. He didn't call out. He didn't have to. He knew where I had been. That morning, I went to see if Billy still existed. The bar had been replaced by a place with high ceilings and a menu printed in a font that was proud of itself. He was behind the counter, cleaning a glass like a man in a movie. He looked up when I took a stool. His eyes didn't glow. They were blue, same as always, with that bloodshot kindness that made you confess things you had no right to say out loud. For a moment, the reset took a step back and let us have each other. "You look like you haven't slept," he said. "I haven't," I said. I saw the new municipal basement. He chuckled. That where they keep the old mayor the way you keep sourdough starter? Something like that, I said. He poured coffee without asking. It was better than O'Hara's ever made. The loss stung. The improvement did too. Both can be true. He leaned across the counter and said, "They say the town's getting nicer." "They say that," I said. "You believe it?" he asked. "I believe people who say it like being believed," I said. "I believe the old park had splinters, and that's why I learned to use my hands. I believe your bar had a floor so sticky it kept drunks upright when they couldn't do it themselves." He laughed. It was new laughter riding old timing. "You remember that time old man Kincaid fell asleep with his forehead on the jukebox and sang through the next 4 songs like a haunted saxophone?" I said. "Yeah, we drank coffee." Neither of us mentioned that O'Hara's was a ghost the town couldn't afford anymore. He didn't ask if I was okay. He knew I wasn't. He also knew he couldn't make me be. At 3:02 that night, I went to the church. Not inside. I stood across the street with my hands in my pockets and watched. The preacher stood in the doorway. The pews were full. The black mirror breathed. When 3:03 came, I watched the world take its steps sideways. It still hurt. It still sounded like an inhale. The mirror rippled. It did not catch me. I walked home on the sidewalk that belonged to the version of pine the town had chosen. A dog barked at a street it remembered from a morning earlier in a town that no longer existed. The watch turned a corner like a minuet. When I passed the empty lot where a house had once been, then an apartment tower, then a lot again, then a building, I stopped and said out loud the words I had been hoarding where no facility could file them. 2 girls, bikes, a laugh like a squeaky gate, and a laugh like a bottle being opened with a ring. The air didn't correct me. The night didn't file me a complaint. A moth flew through the streetlight and smacked itself stupid against its own choice. I slept before dawn for the first time in weeks. No dreams I could keep. The clock still said 3:03 when I glanced at it in the dark for no reason, and then closed my eyes again because I had a reason now not to tend the machine. In the morning, a building I didn't recognize had made itself at home at the end of the block. It would stay a week or a decade. I nodded to it like you nod to a newcomer who will either learn where to get good eggs or move. I made breakfast. The eggs were ordinary. The coffee was too strong. The light came in at an angle I hadn't expected and hit the table where someone else's glass once left a permanent ring. I put my cup an inch away. After work, I sat on my stoop and wrote with a pen on my palm because paper lied now and then. I wrote names and sentences I meant and blew on them so the ink would dry into the valleys of my skin and make a fossil just long enough. A kid on a scooter went by wobbly and looked up for approval. I lifted my hand to show him the map I'd made there. He grinned like he'd been blessed and did not need the word for it to be true. When night came, I didn't fight it. The town would breathe without my supervision. I lay down and breathed too. If the watch stood under the hydrangea, they stood without my attention. If the church mirror glittered, it glittered without my face. If the municipal basement hummed its song of paper and glass, it hummed without me as a note in it. I would go there again someday. I knew it. Places are habits with plumbing, but next time I'd bring what will not be filed, a joke that only lands once, told to one person at a table with a glass ring in it. The kind of thing that doesn't make the map shift but makes the hour bearable. The kind of thing that outlives resetting because it doesn't try to. At 3:03, the town adjusted its picture frames and smoothed its covers and practiced its smile. Across the hall in the next building, someone woke for no reason and went back to sleep without giving the moment a name. Somewhere under the municipal building, a woman watched a handless clock and made a note about the angle of a street. In the church with the black mirror, a preacher said a word that wasn't quite amen. On Pine, I breathed. The step sideways happened. It took nothing from me. I hadn't already decided to lay down. In the morning, I wrote a sentence on my palm. We go on. It would wash away by noon. That was all right. I knew it long enough to hand it to the day. If the town wanted it for itself, it would have to come and take it from my skin while I was using it, and I had learned how to sit between notes and mean it. Someone at the corner asked me how long Wren's had been there, and I said, since it needed to be, and they nodded like that was good enough because sometimes it is. I still wake at 3:03. Some nights I get up and count the beats between the town's inhale and its exhale. Some nights I sleep through it, like someone who trusts the person driving. The resets are not done, neither am I. We are both practicing. We are both trying to be livable without becoming only that. If there is a cost, I pay it out of change and keep a bill in reserve for when the waiter is kind, and when the street stretches a finger's width in the wrong direction and catches my heel. I step, loosen kneed, and call it dancing, because if the place is going to have a ritual, so am I. Now, on to the next story. I hadn't meant to end up in Ashgrove. That sounds like an excuse, but it's the truth. My GPS rerouted after a wreck on the main highway, spitting me onto county roads that grew narrower and less maintained the farther I drove. I should have noticed sooner. The asphalt broke into patches, the street signs rusted until the letters were guesses, and the trees crowded closer as if they had always been promised my car's prey. By the time the Welcome to Ashgrove sign leaned into my headlights, it was too late to turn back. The sign was made of wood, white paint flaking. The letters were hand-stenciled. No state logo, no founded in date, no population count, just 4 words, and under them a slogan carved in smaller script, a place to remember. I eased off the gas. The road narrowed into cracked pavement lined with angle-parked trucks and sedans that looked 20 years old. Street lamps glowed with the sickly orange of bulbs on their last life. Shops with hand-painted windows lined the street. A butcher, a diner, a hardware store with no chain name on the awning. I slowed at an intersection, wondering if I should turn around, but the roads all looked the same. My GPS screen had gone gray. Searching for signal, that was the first wrong thing. The second was the people. They were there, on sidewalks, inside shops, stepping off curbs. At first I thought they were ordinary small-town folks, bundled in jackets against the chill, carrying paper bags or cardboard boxes, but when my headlights touched them, they didn't cast shadows. Not exactly. There was a blur at their feet, a hesitation, like the ground hadn't decided what to do with them. I told myself I was tired, that my eyes were playing tricks, but when a man in a red jacket crossed in front of me, I swear his face flickered, 2 versions of it layered together, one older, one younger, as if the air hadn't chosen which one belonged. I parked outside the diner because where else was I going to stop? The sign above the door read Ashgrove Eats. Neon buzzed faintly. Inside, the booths were upholstered in cracked red vinyl, the tables chipped formica. A woman behind the counter smiled automatically when I entered. "Coffee?" she asked, already pouring. "Sure," I said, sliding onto a stool. The mug she set down was heavy, chipped at the rim. The coffee inside was black and hot. I wrapped my hands around it like an anchor. "You're not from around here," she said. "No." Got turned around. I nodded at the window, where the street bent into shadows. "Didn't even know this place was here." Her smile didn't waver, but her eyes flicked toward the back, just for a second. Not many do. A man 2 stools down spoke without looking up from his plate of eggs. "That's the way it's meant to be." I swallowed hard. "What do you mean?" The waitress set a plate in front of him, though he already had one. He didn't seem to notice. She leaned closer to me. "Where you headed?" "Just passing through," I said quickly, trying to get back on the interstate. Her smile widened, stiff as old glue. "You'll find your way." The man finally looked at me. His eyes were gray, the kind of gray that looks like it belongs to a photo left in the sun too long. "Don't stay after dark," he said. I finished the coffee in 2 gulps and left cash on the counter. Outside, the town was quieter, fewer cars. The air had a weight to it, like fog without fog. I walked a few steps down the block, peering at the shops. Many had signs painted directly on the glass: Peterson's Hardware, Morris Taylor, the Ashgrove Ledger. I stopped at that one, a newspaper office. Through the window, I saw rows of old printing equipment, the kind that hadn't been used in decades. The lights inside were on, but no one was there. I pressed my hand to the glass. It was cold. When I leaned closer, I saw stacks of yellowed papers on a table. The top one read, "Ashgrove Ledger, April 12, 1957. Faded headlines, local baseball scores, town meetings. I glanced at the next stack. "Ashgrove Ledger, April 13, 1957. The one after that, April 14. All the way down, the dates never went past April 30. I pulled back. My breath left a smear on the glass. That was the third wrong thing. Back in my car, the dashboard clock read 8:47 p.m. My phone still had no signal. I drove slowly through the town, looking for a way out. The road wound between more houses, old and close together. Lights glowed in some windows, but they had the same faint delay as the people's shadows, as though the light was being remembered instead of lived. I reached a fork. Both roads led into trees. I picked the left. The pavement ended in half a mile. The road became dirt, then grass, then nothing, just trees, dark and thick, blocking any further passage. I turned around. The right fork ended the same way. I parked and sat gripping the wheel. Something wasn't right. No, something was impossible. This town wasn't on maps. The newspaper had stopped printing in 1957. The people flickered. The roads went nowhere. I tried telling myself it was an elaborate tourist trap, some forgotten historical reenactment town. But who pays for actors to wander sidewalks at night, casting not quite shadows? Who leaves their diner open with real hot coffee and chipped mugs? Who patrols the roads to make sure you can't leave? The dashboard clock ticked to 9 hoes. A bell rang faintly in the distance. I turned the key. The engine coughed once, then died. I tried again. Nothing. Outside, the street was empty. I told myself I would just sleep in the car until morning, but at 9:15, I heard footsteps on the pavement. Slow, deliberate, coming closer. I didn't look right away. I gripped the wheel, knuckles white, breath shallow. The steps passed by the car. I risked a glance. It was the man in the red jacket, the one who'd flickered between faces. Only now, he had no face at all. Where his features should have been was smooth, pale skin, like a canvas someone had wiped clean. And when he turned toward me, I swear I heard a whisper inside my head. "Stay. Remember, stay." I locked the doors and didn't move. He stood there until the clock hit 10. Then he walked on, slow and steady, as if patrolling a place that didn't want to be remembered wrong. That was the fourth wrong thing. I didn't sleep. Sleep felt like giving the place permission to keep me. I sat in the dark until the man in the red jacket was gone, and my hands stopped shaking enough to make a plan. Plans are thin fabric in a storm, but sometimes they're the only thing between you and the rain. At 10:12, the bell rang again, one clear note that felt wrong for a bell that old, as if the sound had been polished too often. Lights in second-floor windows winked off in sequence, not because people were going to bed, but because the town had decided it was time for rooms to dim. The street emptied the way a stage clears before a new scene. My dashboard clock ticked uselessly at me. When I turned the key again, the car gave me nothing back, not even the mercy of trying. If I stayed in the car, I'd become part of the furniture. I opened the door. The night air slid along my skin like cold breath. Somewhere a radio played a song I almost knew. The melody blurred like a face behind frosted glass. I shut the car door softly and headed for the only place I'd spoken to a person who still had features, the diner. Ash Grove Eats was bright against the street, the neon buzzing like a tired hornet. Inside, the same woman stood behind the counter. She didn't look surprised to see me, which was a surprise in itself. "You came back," she said, as if we had an appointment. "My car won't start." "They don't this late," she said. "Not for folks who don't belong. What happens if I do belong?" Her eyes flicked to the window where the street wore its emptiness. "You won't have to ask that again." "What's your name?" I asked, because talking like a normal person felt like defiance. She hesitated. Her mouth made a shape around a word it wasn't sure it should have. "Evelyn," she said finally. "Everyone calls me Eve." She poured coffee without asking. "If you're smart, you'll drink that and keep your mouth shut until the bell at midnight. If you're not smart, you won't make it to midnight." "What's at midnight?" "The deciding," she said. "You'll see." 2 stools down, the man with the gray eyes who had pretended not to be listening earlier was gone, but his plate sat exactly as I'd left it hours ago, and steam still curled from the eggs. When Eve noticed my glance, she set her hand over the plate as if covering a wound. "Don't look at what you can't use," she said. "What if I want to leave?" Her smile was patient and infinitely tired. Everybody wants to leave until they don't. I drank the coffee. It was hotter than it should have been. Heat you have to respect. On the wall behind the counter hung a corkboard with yellowed index cards pinned in rows. Each card had a name written in neat block letters with a date underneath. Some were decades old, some were today's date. At the very bottom, a blank card waited, thumbtack ready. "What are those?" I asked. "Reminders," she said. "Proof, payment, depends who you ask." "The slogan," I said, "on the sign, a place to remember." Her smile didn't move. We meant it. The bell above the door tinkled. A girl came in, maybe 10, hair braided tight, the ends tied with bits of red ribbon that had seen better days. She carried a box of chalk pastels, the way people carry offerings. Her face, thank God, had features, a soft-nosed stubbornness, a seriousness around the eyes. "May," Eve said, with real warmth that was half relief. "You're out late." May ignored that. She looked at me with the frank accounting children do. "You're new." "Lost," I said. "Same thing," she said. She put the chalk on the counter and flipped the lid to show me neat rows of color, some sticks worn to nubs. "You'll want these." Eve made a small hissing sound. "Don't start." May looked at her without blinking. "Can't stop it," she said calmly. "You know the rules." "What rules?" I asked. May picked out a piece of chalk and rolled it between her fingers. "When it gets dark, your face starts to forget itself," she said, as if reciting a recipe. "If someone says your name before midnight, it remembers faster. If no one does, it gets smooth. By dawn, if you still don't have a name out loud, you're a walker." She nodded toward the street. "Patrols. They get given rotes. They don't mind. They don't anything." "I saw one," I whispered. "Red jacket. He used to be Mitch Hartley," Eve said softly, like the way people forgive the dead their worst day. "He owned the feed store. I said his name for years after, just to see if it would help. It didn't." "How do you know my name?" I asked too fast, then realized I'd told neither of them. The alarm must have shown. Eve's mouth tightened. "We don't," she said. "That's the only thing you've done right." May held the chalk out to me. "You can draw your face back if it gets thin. Doesn't last. Helps enough to get through a corner." "May," Eve said. May shrugged. "Would you rather he join the routes?" "What was April 1957? I asked because the question had been banging on my teeth since the newspaper office glass. Eve closed her eyes as if to push back something with lids that weren't made for it. "It was the last time the ledger printed. she said. The state decided budgets worked cleaner with fewer dots on a map. We were a dot, so they took the dot off. Before that, you wouldn't like how it was. Men with clipboards, trucks with radios, people going in and out without saying hello. After, she gestured to the window, after we got small, and small things learn to keep what they can. May hopped off the stool. He needs to mark, she said briskly. It's almost 11. I touched my own face. My fingers felt my nose, my mouth, the 2 lines beside it. I hate in mirrors. In the diner window, my reflection looked like me, but softer around the edges, like someone had been erasing me with a crumbly eraser and then blown the shavings away. How do I mark? I asked. May held up the chalk. You draw where someone would think you belong. On me? I said. On walls? On mirrors? On anything the town looks at? May said. Faces like yours need witnesses. Chalk makes a witness quick. It borrows someone else's eyes for a minute. Eve sighed, but not like she intended to forbid any of this. Go to the ledger, she said, surprising me. If there's any truth left to be had, it's in there. Don't touch the cases. Don't let them set your name. And don't say yes to anyone between here and there. Say yes to what? I asked. You'll know it when it uses your voice, she said. May pressed chalk into my palm. 3 colors, white, gray, and a red, rustier than the ribbons in her hair. These show up in the dark, she said. Draw fast. If your hand shakes, draw anyway. Why are you helping me? I asked. She shrugged. Somebody helped me, she said simply. Anyway, I like pictures. The bell at the back of the diner rang twice. The sound came from nowhere obvious. Eve flinched. That's the watchers, she said. Go. Outside, the temperature had dropped, the kind of cold that sits inside your jacket and makes your bones consider how tired they are. The street had the texture of a dream on the knife edge of nightmares, too empty, too expectant. I kept to the stoops, moved quickly, and didn't look too long at any window that looked too long at me. The ledger office door was unlocked. It shouldn't have been. The glass was colder than the air. Inside, the smell of ink and old paper was thick enough to taste. Machines hunched in the gloom, like animals that behave if you respect their teeth. On the long table, stacks of broadsheets lay in their neat uselessness. Dates pausing forever at the end of 1 month in 1 year. Don't touch the cases, Eve had said, which meant I was going to want to. I walked past the typesetter trays anyway, forests of tiny metal teeth waiting for someone to bite down on. Names lay there in individual letters, the alphabet chopped into currency. In the corner, beyond a rack of wooden sticks used for stirring paste, stood a cabinet with shallow drawers labeled in pencil, S-E-R names, firsts, places. At the top right, an unlabeled drawer sat open by an inch. I should have left it alone. I didn't. I pulled it open. Inside was a single line of handset type already locked into a small chase. I didn't have to ink it to read the words. I could read them backwards, in metal, a string of letters that became my name with eerie clarity. I shut the drawer so hard the cabinet shuddered. Someone in the room laughed. Not a big laugh, not directly at me. The way a school hallway laughs when you pretend you didn't trip. I spun. No one? The laugh came again, this time from the direction of the doorway. And when I looked, I saw 2 walkers standing just outside, red jacket leading, their facelessness turned toward me like a curiosity. The red jacket lifted an arm in the way of a wave, and then let it fall, a puppet that had remembered the trick too late. I snapped the deadbolt. The lock slid home with a sound like weak thunder. It was probably ceremonial. It made me feel better anyway. My reflection in the big framed front window had blurred further. The chalk burned a line in my palm where I gripped it. I didn't think. I drew fast and ugly. 2 crooked eyebrows, a triangle nose, a mouth with too many teeth. The instant the chalk squeaked, The glass seemed to take a breath. My reflection snapped into focus, long enough for my stomach to unknot. The chalk face wasn't mine, exactly, but it was witness enough. The window approved with a tiny click like a camera shutter. At 11:24, the bell rang once, then again, then a third time, a rhythm that said something to the town and nothing to me. Beyond the glass, people, no figures, began to move together, converging on Main like iron filings toward a magnet. Walkers in their patrol jackets, people with faces, eyes shining like blown glass. A few like me, features softening and sharpening as they were named or not named by those who loved them. They carried candles that were not candles and paper that wasn't paper, a procession, quiet, terrible in its ordinariness. They passed the ledger, and the window fogged a little from their breath, though no breath made that sound. Behind them, farther back, I saw a small figure with red ribbons in her hair, carrying her chalk box like a drum. May caught my eye for a fraction of a second and made a drawing motion in the air with her finger. Then she disappeared into the tide. I had to decide, follow the procession or go the other way. The bell at midnight, Eve had said. The deciding, I could stand here under a chalk face and watch and be counted. Or I could try to break something. The drawer with my name in it felt like a hand squeezing the back of my neck. I pulled it open again and took the little chase out. It was heavier than it looked. The weight of letters is always misjudged by people who only speak. I turned it over in my hand. The reversed letters didn't look like me until they did. I found a mallet on the typesetter's bench, the head scarred with half a century of corrections. If I smashed the form, would it stop being true, or would the town set it again, faster, now that it knew I minded? Something knocked against the back door, soft, insistent, like someone rubbing their knuckles up and down wood in a nervous habit. Don't, a voice whispered on the other side. Not the town, not the watchers. A human voice, frayed and urgent. If you smash it, it splits. It'll set twice. Who are you? I asked the wood. Stephen Oakes, the voice said. My name's on the wall at the diner. It used to be on the drawer. Please. The knuckles rubbed again. Put it in the wrong tray. That buys you a night. The wrong tray. I yanked open drawers until I found one labeled Places, and under it one labeled Days, and under that a deep drawer labeled Things We Don't Use. I slid my name into the bottom of that and shoved the drawer shut. The cabinet seemed to shiver, as if in mild distaste. The laughter in the room stopped. Thank you, the voice said through the door. Now get somewhere someone can say you. The deciding soon. How do they know a name? I asked. I never told anyone. The ledger does, he said simply. It reads wallets and glove boxes and the bottoms of screens. It reads what you write on your hand when you think that makes you safe. Go. I ran. The procession had slowed at the square where the courthouse should have been. There was no courthouse, only a low stone wall covered entirely with names, carved shallow, as if the stone had insisted on staying itself. People stood before it in pairs and trios, touching names with their fingertips, lips moving. The names glowed faintly for a second, when spoken, and then dimmed. Walkers stood at the edges, patient, their blankness turned toward the wall like animals brought to a fence they can't cross, but don't fight. The bell at midnight rang with a tone that made my fillings sting. On the last stroke, the candles that were not candles flared, and the wall lit from within like a book learning its own story. The preacher, if that's what he was, raised his hands, and the town listened with its bones. If you have someone to keep, he said, say them now. People spoke. A rustle of names filled the square. Some brightened and held for a heartbeat. Some didn't catch and slid back into the stone like embarrassed fish. I heard Eve's voice, steady. Mitch Hartley. The red jacket walker's head turned a fraction, but the wall only sighed. The preacher's eyes lifted and found me the way a searchlight finds a rooftop. "We have a guest," he said, and the square turned toward me as one. Would someone claim him? The question was kind. The crowd's hunger was not. I stepped backward. My shoulder hit the doorframe of the ledger. May squeezed out of the procession's edge and put her small hand on my wrist. "Say your own name," she breathed. "Say it like you're not asking permission." Every instinct I had balked. Names are things people give you. Saying your own feels like eating your shadow, but my face had gone soft enough that my mouth's shape didn't feel entirely mine. I took a breath that tasted like dust and said my name into the square like it was a thing I had earned. For a moment the air trembled around it. For a moment the wall gave it a dull little glow, uninterested, as if it were a penny. "It needs two," May whispered. "Everything here needs two. It's the rule." "Why, so no one has to do it alone," she said fiercely, as if angry at logic. Before I could beg or bargain, Eve's voice spoke my name from the doorway of the diner, clear as a bell that had not been polished too often. The glow around it sharpened and held. The crowd made a disappointed sound like a drink set down before the lip has decided it's had enough. The preacher smiled with teeth that had learned how to comfort. "Welcome, then," he said. "I'm not staying," I said loudly enough for something bigger than him to hear it. "I don't belong." "We don't keep what's not kept," he said, still kind. "But the roads know what they know." The bell stopped ringing. The candles disappeared as if a draft had embarrassed them. People drifted away from the wall, their names said, their faces sharper again for a few hours. The walkers resumed their routes, blank heads tilted in the way of satisfaction. The square returned to its artful emptiness. "Dawn," May said, tugging me. "You have to make it until dawn, then try the North Road. Sometimes it remembers how to be a road." "What happens if I fall asleep?" "You don't," she said flatly. Eve came up beside us and pressed something into my hand. A small, thin ring of metal, cool as the inside of a church. "It's a key to a door that isn't there most days," she said. "When you find it, it'll be there." "How will I know it?" "It'll feel like remembering the way home in the dark," she said. "It's at the edge of the cemetery where the fence has gone soft. If the key warms in your palm, you're close." "You could come," I said. "Both of you." Eve's smile was knife-thin and stubborn. "I keep the coffee hot," she said. "Someone has to, and someone has to say names." May lifted her chin. "I draw faces on walkers before school," she said, as if that were an extracurricular. "Sometimes they keep for an hour. That's better than nothing." She pushed the chalk back into my pocket. "Go." I went. The streets felt longer on the way out. Names hung in doorways like wind chimes, catching on me as I passed. I didn't answer any of them. The cemetery sat on a low rise at the edge of town, iron fence bowed here and there, where roots had insisted on their own measurements. Headstones leaned toward one another, gossiping, dates blurred. Some stones carried only first names, some carried none. At the far corner, where the fence had more gap than metal, my palm warmed around the little ring. I stood still, listening. The night made a sound like a zipper moving slowly. I reached where the warmth tugged and found air that felt thicker than the air around it, like a curtain drawn across a hallway. I lifted the ring, and the air took it from me like a polite thief. A seam opened, narrow, dark, smelling of rain and tar and jasmine, the damp mineral breath of dirt that still remembers being riverbed. From behind me, the town made a small, almost affectionate disgruntled noise, like a cat watching a bird decide to be interesting elsewhere. Footsteps approached, not a patrol, not synchronized. Eve's, probably, May's, light as chalk dust. I didn't turn. If I looked, I'd stay. That's a rule that's older than any place. "Say your name," May called softly. "One more time." I did. The seam widened enough to admit stubbornness and a body that had decided to believe itself temporary only when useful. I stepped through. The air changed temperature the way a song changes key. Something behind me decided to be done with me for now. I walked into nothing for 6 steps. On the 7th, gravel. On the 8th, pavement. On the 9th, the smell of creosote and pine and morning that hasn't been built yet. I turned around. There was no seam, no fence, no town, only trees. The key cooled in my palm until it was just metal again. I kept walking until the light through the branches turned from gray to an honest color. Birds began to sound like themselves instead of like sound effects. When I finally stopped, a highway lay across my path like a sentence. Cars moved on it without arguing with a map. My phone woke up in my pocket and pretended it hadn't been asleep. Service bars bloomed like a miracle that had been scheduled. On the shoulder, I sat with my head in my hands and breathed like a person. The chalk in my pocket had broken into dust. My face felt like it fit my skull again. I said Eve's name out loud because no one else would be able to, not outside that fence, and the air took it and did nothing ceremonial with it, which felt like mercy. When I looked at my phone's map, there was no ash grove. There was a gap where the road should have continued, and then woodland, and then the next town, which had the gall to call itself Evergreen Heights. I didn't mark the spot. I didn't drop a pin. Some things you keep without coordinates. I got in the first car that stopped and said the first true thing I'd said in hours. I need a ride anywhere that's not here. The driver nodded like he had heard versions of that sentence from people who were not me. He did not ask why I was dusty and holding a ring that had no key to accompany it. He turned the radio up, and the song was one I fully recognized, words and all, and I sang along until I laughed and then cried, and then laughed again. I don't know why I looked in the side mirror when I did. Habit, compulsion, faithlessness. In the sliver of glass I saw trees, and then for a fraction of a second, the white painted back of a wooden sign with letters carved in it, facing the other way, the side of a sentence that says, "Welcome to when you read it forward, and remember when you read it backward." The road curved and the mirror forgot. I slept that night in a motel 2 towns away. The lamp turned on when I touched it. The water ran honest. I woke at 2:57 and counted to midnight like a child who can count to any number they like, because numbers don't love back. I slept again. In the morning, I found the chalk dust in my pocket and made a small mark on the mirror, a mouth with too many teeth. I wiped it away, and the mirror remembered to be a mirror. I wrote Eve's name on my palm and washed it off and said it anyway. Later I will say May's. Later I will send a letter with no address and no stamp and drop it in a mailbox and ask the world to do its job badly for once. Later I will tell someone else at 9 at night not to take the left fork. Later I will fail, and the roads will rearrange themselves around my certainty, and I will laugh because you have to laugh at a map that thinks it owns the land it draws. For now, I drove until the trees changed species. For now, I stopped at a diner with blue vinyl seats and a waitress named Carla and ate eggs that steamed and cooled and stayed cooled like physics hadn't been locally repealed. For now, I answered when Carla asked my name and she wrote it down on a ticket without it glowing, and that was enough. If I ever go back, and I will, because the road has made that part of me, it will be before dark, and I will bring someone else's names folded in my wallet, like money. Mitch Hartley, Stephen Oakes, all the ones on the corkboard, and the ones May will add in chalk between bells. I will stand by the wall and say them like prayer and apology, and I will listen to the stone do nothing obvious in return, and I will hope that is a kind of answer. And if I see a man in a red jacket and his face as smooth as a stone in a river, I will draw him one quick with whatever I have. It won't last, it never does. But sometimes an hour is the whole world, and if I learned anything between bells, it's that an hour given is not the same as an hour taken. Dawn makes liars and saints of everyone. I don't know which I was when I stepped through. I know which I am now, a person who keeps walking, a person who says the names he can, a person who leaves the chalk where someone else can find it when the map turns gray and the bell rings wrong and the sign promises a place to remember. I told myself I was free. I said it out loud the morning after, in the motel bathroom with the buzzing light and the cracked sink, staring at my reflection that stayed mine all the way down to the jawline. I said it again while checking out at the front desk, where the clerk didn't even look up, and the words tasted like normal words. But the thing about saying you're free is that you only say it when you're not. I drove east for hours. The landscape shifted, not abruptly, but the way a bruise darkens. Cornfields, silos, old barns leaning into themselves. By noon, I reached a town called Bridgewater that had a Walmart, a gas station with card readers that worked, and a police car idling in front of a donut shop like a parody. Civilization in its loud and ugly forms. I almost wept with relief. I parked in the lot and sat in my car until the seatbelt chime shut itself up. Then I walked inside the Walmart just to be among people who carried shopping carts and cursed at prices. I needed the noise. I needed the indifference. I needed to stand in an aisle and look at 100 brands of cereal until I felt the weight of choice again. I reached for a box, didn't matter which, and a woman beside me said, "You don't want that, John." I froze. My name in her mouth, soft, casual. I turned. She was middle-aged, brown hair cut blunt to her shoulders, eyes the color of wet cardboard. Her cart was full of cleaning supplies. She didn't look at me again after saying it, just pushed her cart down the aisle. My name echoed in my head like a bell. I left the cereal box where it was and walked out of the store, heart racing. In the parking lot, the same woman was loading bags into her trunk. She glanced at me once, blank and uninterested, then drove away. I could have convinced myself it was coincidence. Maybe she was talking to someone on her phone, though I hadn't seen one. Maybe I'd misheard. Maybe. But when I started my car, the radio flickered on by itself. Static, then a voice buried in it. "Remember, John? Remember." I slammed the power button. The radio went silent. Bridgewater was supposed to be far enough. It wasn't. I drove again, pushing past towns, past counties. Every gas station I stopped at, someone said something too close to me. Words that bent around my name without quite landing, or questions that felt like invitations. At a diner 2 towns away, the waitress wrote my name on the check without me telling her. When I asked why, she looked down at the slip, startled, and said, "You told me." I hadn't. That night I checked into another motel, this one older, the carpet patterned with stains that looked like maps of rivers. I left the TV on just for noise, a rerun of some sitcom, laughter that rose and fell like waves. I was halfway to sleep when the laugh track cut out mid-peal. The screen went blank. Then words appeared, white on black. "We remember you." I yanked the plug from the wall. The screen stayed lit another 5 seconds before winking out. I didn't sleep. The next morning I called my sister, just to anchor myself to something outside my head. She lived 3 states away, had kids, a life full of chaos I could rely on to drown my fears. When she picked up, her voice was bright and harried as always. "John, been a while. How's it going?" "Fine," I said, trying to sound steady. "Just traveling." "Where are you?" I hesitated. "Not sure. Somewhere in Ashgrove?" she asked. My throat closed. "What did you say?" "Ashgrove," she repeated, casual as asking if I'd had lunch. "We went there once, didn't we? With Mom? Or am I mixing it up?" "We never went there," I said. My voice shook. "Maybe not," she said lightly. "Anyway, how's the car holding up?" I hung up. My sister had never heard of Ashgrove. No one had. That was the point. The rest of the day blurred. Every town looked the same. Every gas station clerk glanced at me too long. Every stranger seemed ready to speak my name. By dusk, I'd convinced myself the only safe place was nowhere public. I drove until I found a rest area half abandoned, picnic tables broken, bathrooms locked. I parked in the farthest corner, engine off, and sat with the windows cracked. The key in my pocket, the little ring Eve had given me, was cold, colder than metal should be in a car that had baked all day. I held it in my palm. It didn't warm. At 9, a sound drifted through the trees, faint like a bell. I gripped the wheel. No, I was miles away, counties, states, but the bell rang again. A car pulled into the rest area, headlights sweeping. I ducked low. The car stopped 2 spaces over. A door opened. Footsteps, slow, deliberate. I peeked. A man in a gray coat walked across the lot. His face was wrong. Not blank, not yet, but soft at the edges. His mouth blurred, his eyes slipping out of focus, like someone smeared them with a thumb. He stopped by my car and bent close to the window. "John," he said, my name in a voice that was almost mine. "You shouldn't run. Running makes the forgetting worse." I didn't answer. I didn't breathe. He straightened, tilted his head as if listening to something far away, then walked back to his car and drove off without headlights. The sound of his engine faded too quickly, like it had been erased. The key in my hand pulsed once, faint and quick, then it went cold again. I started the car and drove all night. No destination, just away. But no matter how far I went, the highway signs didn't make sense. Exit numbers skipped. Distances stretched. By dawn, I realized I'd looped back. The gas station I passed had the same cracked sign, the same trash can with its lid missing. Ash Grove wasn't behind me. It was around me. It had extended itself like roots. At 7 a.m., I pulled into a diner I didn't recognize. New, clean, chrome trim shining. The sign read Evergreen Heights Family Restaurant. I walked in, desperate for people, for proof of normal. The waitress came over, pad in hand. She smiled. "Coffee?" "Yes," I croaked. She poured. Then, almost without looking, she wrote on her pad. The name at the top of the slip was mine, and underneath, in neat block letters, she had already written, Ash Grove. I stared at the word until the letters blurred. When I looked up, every person in the diner was staring at me. None of them blinked. The coffee tasted like the idea of coffee, the way dreams remember flavors, bitter but without bite, hot but unable to scald. I set the cup down, and it didn't make a sound. The waitress's smile stayed perfect and empty. The other diners watched without moving their forks. No clink of silverware, no scrape of chair legs, only the hum of lights and the soft breath of the air conditioner pretending to be weather. I stood up. The waitress stood a little taller with me, as if attached to my motion by fishing line. "Headed home?" she asked in a voice that didn't carry past my table. I looked down at the ticket again. My name, Ashgrove. The total read, "I'm just leaving," I said. Saying leaving felt like pushing against a door that opened inward. "Not without this," she said, and slid the slip toward me. A neat circle had been drawn in the corner, around a time, 9 p.m. Someone had written the words "Bell Due." I backed toward the exit. The other diners' eyes tilted as one, tracking me the way sunflowers follow light. The bell over the door didn't ring when I pushed it open. Outside, the parking lot looked like every diner lot. Sun-blasted asphalt, hot wind, a piece of straw tumbling without enthusiasm. But the horizon was wrong. A stand of pines drew a line where pines shouldn't be. A white-painted sign stood crooked on a far bank like a memory trying to sit up. I got in the car and drove without looking in the mirrors. The road out of the lot curved in a way I hadn't taken it, and the highway found me like a vein. I merged and kept moving. The GPS pretended to work again, showing me a blue triangle on a gray ribbon that never bent. The town slid past their exits like beads on a string. I didn't take any of them. I kept going until the sun had the lazy wait. It gets an hour before it remembers how to set. At a rest stop, I pulled into a far corner and sat with the engine idling, hands on the wheel, listening. The engine sounded like an engine. The radio showed a station name, and didn't speak my name through static. A family picnicked 3 tables away, arguing about mustard. The world wanted me to be reassured. It almost worked. At 6:17, the keyring in my pocket warmed. Not hot, alive. It had done that before at the cemetery fence. I took it out and held it up. In the late light, it looked like a ring from a curtain rod, a thing meant to hold a fabric between one room and another. It pulsed once. The wind died the way wind dies when a door closes in a house you're sure is empty. I drove again. Not east or west, not to any named place. I followed the pull of the key, the way people follow a smell they can't identify, but want. The highway shrugged and became a 2-lane and then a county road. The pines thickened, dark as memory, when it's trying to hide something from you for your own good. The asphalt broke into patches. The street signs got the soft edges of metal that has learned to be patient. A mile marker read 33, and then 03, and then 303 in a way that numbers shouldn't. I laughed, a sound that sounded borrowed from someone steadier than me. You're showing off, I said to a place I couldn't yet see. I get it. The key warmed, pleased. When the Welcome to Ashgrove sign finally leaned into my headlights, it looked cleaner. Someone had repainted the letters, the slogan underneath, the one that had always read "A Place to Remember," had been recut. The last word had been scraped and re-lettered with more pressure. It now read, "A Place to Be Remembered." I stopped the car in the middle of the street, killed the engine, and listened to the town breathe. It exhaled with relief, in a tone I'd learned to hear in the diner, when Eve slid me coffee hot enough to matter, in May's flat little voice, when she explained rules no child should have to know, in the way the walkers turned their heads toward the square, patient, relief that I had come back to make the shape that had already been cut for me. I parked outside Ashgrove Eats. Neon buzzed like a promise made to light. Before I reached the door, the bell above it rang twice. Eve stood behind the counter as if she had been waiting in that posture since the minute I left. "You look taller in the story," she said, and smiled like that joke had kept her from weeping some nights. "Sit." I didn't sit. "It's spreading," I said. "You know that." Her smile didn't falter. "Is it, or did you just learn to see where it already is?" She nodded at the chalkboard where the day's pie had been written in fading loops. People always think the sea is rising when they finally notice how far the tide reaches. I was 2 states away. My sister said the name. A stranger wrote it down. A waitress. I stopped because that sentence had a mirror in it, and Eve was looking into it. Eve poured coffee, set it on the counter between us like a peace offering she would forgive me for refusing. "The town remembers who remembers it," she said. "That was always the rule, even before they took the dot off the map. You took a piece of us when you left. We touched the piece that was touching you." "I didn't take anything," I said, and the key warmed guilty against my leg. "You took a key," she said. "It's all right. We made that one to be stolen. You can't stand in a locked room and call yourself free." The bell at the back rang 3 times, fast, and somewhere deep in the town, a low groan rolled under the floors. The building settled around us, or the place beyond the building did. 9, Eve said, glancing at a clock that had no hands and yet offered a time anyway. "You'll want to be where you want to be kept before it rings." May's at the wall drawing. She's been practicing noses. "Where's the ledger?" I asked. "Where it always is," she said, "except when it isn't." I set the ticket from the Evergreen Heights diner on the counter. Belle Due circled. She nodded without touching it. "They're learning merchandising," she said dryly. "We're a brand now." Terrible word. Accurate. "What am I supposed to do?" I asked. "Go underground and unplug a machine? I saw your basement sisters upstate." Eve's mouth made a shape that would have been a laugh if it had been given more oxygen. That room's for places trying to forget their old names cleanly enough to sell new houses. Ours doesn't have a basement like that. We keep our mechanism where people can see it and pretend they can't. The wall is ours. The bell is ours. The walkers are what happens when a tool does its job in an ugly way. What happens if I smash the bell? I said, half to make her flinch, half because I was angry, and anger needs a verb. Then the town learns to hum, she said, and humming is worse. It doesn't leave space for speaking. She leaned forward, her voice dropping. Don't break our instruments because you don't like the song. Help us carry the tune. I hated that made sense. I hated how much I loved it. Where's May? With the names, Eve said, and softened. She's fast now. She can hold 3 at once. She'll have forearms like a mechanic by winter. I took a breath and let it out slow. The air tasted like hot dust and cinnamon sugar, the way it does when you walk past a bakery at closing. I think I know what the key is for, I said. Not just for leaving, for opening something that doesn't stay open. Eve's smile went crooked at one corner. Good, she said. You'll like the cemetery tonight. It's got more doors than usual. Will you be all right? I am exactly as all right as I am, she said. Get on with it. I went. The street laid itself for me the way a dog lies down for a child it trusts enough to hurt it by accident. Walkers turned their blank faces slightly away as I passed, which felt like a courtesy. The square swelled with people, those with faces sharpened by the hour, those blurred around the edges waiting for someone to bother, those in between like me, not belonging and being used for it. The wall of names glowed faint as a coal. The preacher lifted his hands, and the town tilted inward. May stood on a milk crate, chalkbox open on the wall's ledge, drawing as fast as she could. Eyebrows, the suggestion of a lip line, a half a dimple. Her drawings were bad and true, and that was why they worked. People stood in front of her and the wall at once, saying names, tracing the cuts with their fingers, as if pressing would help. The bell was quiet, but its weight filled the square the way weather fills a sky. I should have gone to the wall. I should have added my mouth to the chorus and been glad of being one voice among many, because there is a relief in being part of a sound that makes the ground approve. The key in my pocket asked me to keep walking. I cut through the alley where the ledger's side door used to be and wasn't, and the buildings leaned together overhead like people whispering gossip about you that they know you can hear. The back way to the cemetery was shaded with the heavy leaves of trees that don't belong in this climate and thrive anyway out of spite. At the fence, the key warmed to ache. I stood where I had stood the night I left and lifted it, but the seam wasn't where the seam had been. Of course it wasn't. Doors that matter move. Doors that save you insist on new habits. I walked the edge. At the far corner, a patch of air felt heavier. I held the key up, and circumstances took it the way deep water takes a coin you flip because you believe in childish promises. The seam opened, wider than before. The smell that rolled out was not rain, and tar and geosmin. It was ink and hot metal, and paper, warm from being handled. The ledger. I stepped through and into the printing office, but not the empty one I had explored alone. The machines were alive, belts turning, rollers inking, the press throwing its weight with the pleasure of a body doing the work it was built for. People moved through the room, men and women, and the spaces between, sleeves rolled, hair tied back, hands stained with black. Their faces were ordinary and full of decision. None of them looked at me long enough to make me a problem. A woman at the imposing stone slid a chase into a press, and the press took it from her and did not thank her, and she didn't need it to. On a work table to the right lay a stack of broadsheets, still damp, print clean and assertive. I picked one up, and the date at the top made my mouth go dry. Today's, not April 1957. Today. headlines that meant nothing to anyone outside a place that wanted them. Market on Main adds third vendor. Donation drive exceeds goal. Bell maintenance scheduled. The last one took my breath. The article was short. Volunteers needed for inspection and upkeep of the bell at midnight. Meet at the square. Bring oil and rope. I let the page fall back onto the stack, and the ink smudged my hand like guilt. In the corner, the shallow drawer cabinet stood with its mouth half open, the label on the top drawer altered by a hand that wrote like Eve's Esser names, active. Below, Esser names rest. Below that, firsts active. Firsts rest, places, days, things we no longer call things. The unlabeled drawer that had held my name before now bore a label in May's taller, angrier letters. Names that argue. I pulled it open. Inside, a half-dozen little chases lay ready. A strip of handset type rested on top. I read it in the mirror of my mind without lifting it. May, no last name, just May, the only name the town would let her have yet, the only name she had decided to keep, the only name that belonged to a person who drew faces onto air. I looked up. The noise of the room softened. The people were still working, but the edges of them blurred the way a face does when you remember it from one photograph that got bent and never smoothed. The heat of the presses dropped a degree. Someone at the back opened a door that hadn't been a door, and cool night laid its palm on the room. The bell above the square lifted its head. I took the chase with May's name in it. I took a second that was blank. I slid them into my pocket with the little ring, the metal heavy enough together to feel like a choice. I walked to the seam and stepped through before the room had the good sense to make me part of it. Back at the fence, the night was fuller. Towns have a way of pressing themselves into shape the minute a bell breathes in. I ran down the hill, through the alley, into the square, where the preacher was raising his hands for silence that was already there. Eve stood under the diner's awning, face flushed from a heat that would kill one day and keep another alive a decade. May stood on her crate, chalk in one hand, the other braced on the wall, jaw set, the chalk dust on her cheeks like war paint. The bell exhaled. I pushed forward through bodies that moved without touching. When I reached May, she didn't look at me. Too late for stories, she said, name or chalk. I brought you something, I said and pressed the little chase into her chalky palm. She closed her fingers around it without looking, and then she did look, and her mouth softened. You thief, she whispered, awed. Good steal. Where does it go? I said. Where it isn't supposed to, she said, and slid it into her pocket with the tenderness of a person putting a tooth in a box under pillow law. Say yours. I have two hands. I said my name, and it held longer this time, brightened by 100 mouths that didn't belong to me or to anyone I trusted. That's the town's gift and cruelty. It gives you a chorus and decides the song. The wall pulsed around the spot where my syllables hit it, and then let me be for a breath. May drew 3 quick lines on the stone, snap, 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 and someone's face across the square, sharpened long enough for their partner to speak their name smoothly, and the wall hummed satisfaction. Bell maintenance after, the preacher said in his syrup and silver voice. Volunteers? Hands lifted. Eve's, Stephen Oakes's, and the sight of his face in the crowd with features all the way to the mouth made me forgive a door for lying to me. A handful of others. The preacher's smile was admiration delivered with contempt. Good. We'll honor the instrument that honors us. I leaned toward May. Where is it? I asked. The bell. Where is it rung from? Up, she said. And then, because she had decided I deserved one more useful sentence, there's a hatch behind the wall. It opens if you don't look at it. I hate your town, I said too softly to hurt anyone but myself. Me too, she said. Now go. The square loosened. People drifted home along grooves worn by worry. The walkers resumed their routes with the contentment of machines given fresh oil. The few who had volunteered gathered near the wall, with cans and cloths, and a coil of rope that looked as it always does when rope is waiting to be useful, smug. I walked the curve of the wall, names pressed at my shoulder blades, like a crowd at a concert 10 years ago that I still remember as being kinder than it was. The hatch was exactly where May had said, behind the wall, flush with it, not a hatch until your hand moved across the stone, without your eyes daring to follow. It opened when I touched it. Stale air breathed out, smelling of dust and hot iron, and public speaking. A ladder descended into a space that couldn't exist. I went down. The chamber was narrow and tall, built like a throat. The bell hung in the dark like a thought you don't want to say out loud, because you know it will make your body react. Its surface was not bronze. It looked like stone worn to a shine by hands. Around its lip, someone had scratched words that weren't language and meant exactly what language would have meant if it were good enough. A rope dangled from its clapper, running down the shaft and through a pulley the size of a shoulder. The floor was not a floor. It was a platform that remembered wood and pretended to be stronger. Eve came down the ladder after me with the ease of a person who had climbed worse to reach kinder rooms. She carried a little can of oil and a cloth. You weren't invited, she said, as if I had crashed a birthday. You volunteered, I said. I came to keep you honest. It was not the truth, and it didn't need to be. She stood next to the bell and bowed her head in a way that meant respect, not prayer. She held up the cloth, and I took it because that was the rule here. Things are done by more than one hand. Stephen Oakes made his way down next, breathing hard but not complaining. 2 others followed, faces I recognized from earlier that day and maybe 40 years ago. We stood around the bell like a family that has decided to forgive each other tonight and get back to the work of being strangers tomorrow. You want to break it? Stephen said without heat. I want to misalign it, I said, the way your agent told me not to. Eve looked up at the shape that had held her nights in a steady grip for decades. You will tear us, she said. You will make people think they can hold 2 truths without being cut, and some of them can't. Some of them can, I said, and the ones who can't will have learned something truer than sleep. That's not a mercy, she said. It is if they asked, I said. I'm asking for me. She sighed, considered, put the oil can on the edge of the platform, and did the cruelest, kindest thing one person can do for another. She nodded permission for me to be myself. Do it then, she said. If it goes wrong, we'll keep what we can. If it goes right, we'll keep what we can. Those are the only choices we ever had. I wrapped the cloth around the rope, not to buffer my hands, but to mark a length. At 3, I said. We ring at midnight, Stephen said, puzzled. We ring at 3, I said. Not the minute that doesn't exist. The beat between the beats. They looked at me like people look at a person who has decided to jump into a river and is still asking about the temperature. The bell waited, amused, a god that pretends it's a tool. I pulled, not hard, enough to make the clapper kiss the bell without love. The sound that came up was not a ring. It was a breath held too long being let go. It was the space between my name and my mouth, and Eve saying it for me. It broke me a little and set me straight a lot. Above us, the town paused. The wall stilled. The walkers stopped with 1 foot slightly ahead. The preacher opened his mouth, and the mirror behind him did not catch his face for a second. May's chalk hovered over the stone and waited to be told whether noses exist tonight. I pulled again, a fraction to the side, misaligning the clapper so the sound had to find a new path through old air. The bell complained and forgave me at once. A crack ran a hair's breadth along an old seam and then stopped, a warning or a signature. The town breathed in. It did not exhale. In that held breath, things could happen that didn't fit either map. I reached into my pocket and took out the second blank chase and slid it along the lip of the bell, where the words had been carved by hands that had been dead longer than I had been alive. The metal printed a ghost of itself on the stone, not letters, possibility. Above us, some names glowed that had not been spoken, not many, enough that the wall learned a new shade. At the edge of the square, two walkers turned toward each other and then kept turning, as if remembering faces is not the same as keeping them. A door opened somewhere it never does, and the smell of jasmine rolled in like a promise that remembers it's a threat. Enough, Eve said very softly, not to me, to the bell. Enough. I let the rope rest. The bell settled. The held breath let itself out. The town exhaled, and the sound was not a ring or a sigh, but something older, the creak of a boat that has accepted another passenger and will not complain unless you make it. We climbed up into the square where the world had resumed its shape, with a dent in it that would not come out. The preacher's eyes were brighter and meaner. He had felt the misalignment, the way a dancer feels a floorboard give, and resents the stagehand whose fault it wasn't. The walkers were already back on their routes, but their blankness looked sunburned. May grinned at me with all the teeth Eve had accused me of drawing on glass. You did it wrong, she said. Good. Don't teach children that, the preacher said, smiling with 2/3 of his face. We thrive because we do things right. We survive because we do things together, Eve said levelly. Right is a luxury. He inclined his head. The mirror behind him pulsed once and went still. We'll remember that, he said, and we all heard the capital letter at the start of Remember Not Spoken and saw it anyway. The crowd thinned. The night loosened its grip. I felt the key in my pocket cool to a piece of metal, and then warm again, and then decide not to decide. Eve slid her arm through mine, like an old friend who knows she has to rehearse the familiarity for my sake as much as hers. You should go before dawn makes you sentimental, she said. Come back before you forget why you bothered. You'll call me, I said, and the joke tasted like a thing we could keep. We don't call, she said. We ring. May handed me the blank chase I hadn't used. For when you find a wall that doesn't know it's a wall yet, she said, you can start one. That's a curse, I said. That's a kit, she said. I walked to the cemetery. The hatch closed above the bell like an eyelid tired of being asked to witness. The fence learned where the gap was tonight and showed me. I held the key up, and the seam opened like a throat that trusts the pill you're giving it. On the threshold I turned, because I am not a saint, and because I wanted one more truth to carry. Eve at the diner door, already pouring coffee for a dawn that hadn't come. May on her crate, sketching features onto stone that would wear them for an hour because an hour can be everything. Stephen Oakes speaking his own name with the care of a man who might finally keep it where he can find it, in the dark. The preacher, small when seen from behind, adjusting his collar like a man who knows he will be photographed and wants to look deserving. The walkers, roots intersecting like veins, patient. I stepped through and into the ordinary night on the other side of someone else's fence. The road remembered how to be a road. The trees knew their species. The air did not write my name on screens. I drove until the key was only a ring, and the bell was only a sound in my skull that would fade when I pretended to forgive myself. At a gas station 2 hours away, the clerk asked if I wanted a receipt. He didn't write my name on it. The radio played a song that had never been in Ashgrove, and never will. I laughed too hard at nothing. The woman in the next aisle smiled at me without using my name, and said, Long night? And I said, a bit, and that was the kindest exchange I'd had with a stranger in a month. I slept at noon in a motel with a quilt someone had actually washed that week. I dreamed of a bell that rang at no hour and at all of them, and of a wall in a town that was never on a map, lifting its face toward a child's hand and letting itself be drawn on because a rule is a rule, even when it saves you. When I woke, my phone had 3 missed calls from my sister and a text that said simply, "You okay?" I typed yes and meant it for the length of time it took to hit send. She replied with a picture of her kids in front of a school sign, "First day," grins that hadn't learned to fear being erased. I said their names out loud. The room didn't glow. The ceiling didn't hum. The air didn't file the names anywhere. That felt like a miracle. In the weeks after, Ashgrove left me alone the way old injuries leave you alone until the weather changes. Sometimes in grocery aisles, my eye would snag on a brand that shouldn't exist anymore, and I'd check the label and it would be a joke, limited edition retro, and I'd laugh and put it in the cart. Sometimes at 9 out, I'd feel like a bell was about to decide something about me, and I'd go outside and stand under a sky that had its own rules and wait it out. Sometimes I'd take the key out and hold it, and it would be cool, and therefore honest, and therefore safe to put back. When I drove past the turn that would take me anywhere near where the seam might open, I didn't take it, not yet. When I heard the word remember on the radio, I didn't flinch, much. When I saw a man in a red jacket on a sidewalk 2 towns over, I drew a mouth on the condensation of a bus stop's glass and watched it fade and considered that an hour is sometimes the gift you can make and not the world. If the town grows again, I'll feel it in the ring against my leg before I hear it in a waitress's mouth. If it asks me to ring, I might, not to keep it the same. Nothing keeps the same, but to insist on that held breath where people can decide to be people. If it takes someone I love and asks me to forgive it because it's a mechanism and not a villain, I will fail, and then practice, and then fail better. If a wall asks me to start somewhere else, I'll consider it, and if I say yes, I'll bring rope and oil and a child's chalk. For now, I keep a little card on my dashboard, not with my name, with 3 other words written in block letters that lean left like a person taking a corner too fast and getting away with it. Say and mean. When the light hits it just right, the letters look carved. When it doesn't, they look like pen. Both are true. That's enough. Tonight I'll sleep and maybe wake at a minute that can't hold numbers. If I do, I'll breathe. If I don't, I'll breathe. If someone calls my name in a stranger's mouth, I'll answer with my own and wait for the second voice, because everything here needs 2. If there isn't one, I'll call Eve from a payphone that isn't there, and she won't pick up, and that will be its own kind of keeping. And if you find yourself on a road that narrows into trees, and the GPS goes gray, and the welcome sign doesn't carry a date, keep driving if you can, stop if you can't, and if a girl offers you chalk, take it. Draw yourself fast and ugly. It won't last. It never does. But for an hour, it might be the whole world. And an hour is enough to get you to a fence. And a fence is enough to teach you a door. And a door is enough to get you to a road that remembers how to be one. You'll know the bell when you hear it. You'll know your name when you say it. You'll know the difference between being remembered and being kept when you feel it in your knees. Choose the one that makes breathing easier for the people who have to do it alongside you. That's the only map I trust now. The rest is towns drawing themselves and asking us to admire the lines. I admire the hands instead. I told myself I wouldn't go back. I said it the way people swear off old habits, old flames, old bruises. I believed it for a while, but Ashgrove doesn't ask belief. It waits. It folds itself into the folds of your life, one corner at a time, until you wake up with the whole quilt pulled over you. For months I lived like a man who had outrun a fire, but could still smell the smoke in his clothes. The towns I passed through were ordinary, blessedly so. Grocery stores with coupons taped to freezer doors, schools with banners announcing sports victories, gas stations with flickering fluorescents and chewing gum near the counter. Nothing glowed when I said my name. No bells rang wrong. I almost let myself relax, but normality frays when you tug at it. A kid scrawled hopscotch squares on a sidewalk one day, and the numbers bent into letters. My letters before the chalk dust washed away. A man on a bench hummed a tune that sounded like the silence in Ashgrove Square. My phone buzzed with a voicemail from a number not in service. A single chime, then static, then my sister's voice, low and urgent, telling me to come home. I called her back. She answered cheerful, oblivious, talking about the kids' school and the weather. She hadn't called me. I knew better than to tell her what I'd heard. Ashgrove had learned her voice, and that meant I had less time than I thought. The key grew heavier in my pocket. Not warmer, heavier, like carrying a stone in a dream. When I set it on the nightstand, in whatever motel I'd chosen that week, it left a faint ring behind, dark as wet paper. I wiped it away with my sleeve. The stain stayed. By the time I admitted I was being pulled back, I'd already started driving toward the map's blank. The roads curled familiar. The trees leaned in. I kept expecting the welcome sign, but Ashgrove didn't need signs anymore. The town was everywhere and nowhere, a parasite in the arteries of the world. The only way to stop it was at the source. I drove to the cemetery. The fence remembered me. The seam opened without the key, as if the town had learned I didn't need convincing. Inside, the air smelled of chalk dust and iron. May was waiting at the gate, chalk box under her arm, ribbons in her hair frayed from too many nights. "Took you long enough," she said. "You knew I'd come back." "Everyone does," she shrugged. "Eve said you'd try to fight it first. You look tired." "I am tired." She nodded like that was the only honest thing I'd ever said. "It's worse now. The wall's filling up faster. Too many names, not enough mouths to say them. Walkers don't even wait for routes anymore. They just wander, picking up whoever doesn't get claimed." "What about the bell?" Her mouth twisted. "It cracked when you pulled it wrong. Doesn't ring steady. Sometimes it skips a beat. Sometimes it adds one. Nobody knows what that means yet, but the preacher smiles too much about it." "Eve?" I asked. May's eyes flickered, holding on. "But she can't keep the coffee hot for everyone. She says you brought this. She says maybe you can take it away." I almost laughed. "I can't even keep myself safe." "Then let's both be unsafe together," May said. "Come on, she's waiting." The town was hushed, as though listening. Windows watched us pass. The square pulsed with low light from the wall, which glowed brighter now, names burning as fast as they were carved. Eve stood in front of it, chalk-stained hands braced on the stone, her face sharp but pale. "You came," she said, relief and accusation braided in her voice. "I didn't have a choice." "You always have a choice," she said, "but choices here are ugly. You'll learn that again." I told her about the spreading, the names appearing in other towns, the voices borrowed by the air. She nodded. "We knew it would happen once the bell cracked. The rhythm keeps the borders tight. A broken song leaks." "Then fix it," I said. She looked at me with tired fury. "Do you think we haven't tried? We oil it, we polish it, we pray over it, we tie the rope new. It still hums wrong. Maybe it wants to." May climbed onto her crate, drawing faces on the wall faster than I'd ever seen. The names glowed and dimmed, a heartbeat too fast. The preacher stood nearby, smiling wide, his hands folded behind his back. "You see," he said when he noticed me, "the town grows. It remembers more. It keeps more. Isn't that beautiful?" "It's killing people," I said. "It's keeping them," he corrected. "No one's forgotten here. That's mercy. Mercy doesn't look like this. Mercy looks however survival demands," he said. His teeth flashed. "You'll learn." The bell tolled, wrong and hollow. The wall shivered. For a moment, all the names glowed at once. Some faces in the crowd sharpened, others blurred beyond recognition. A walker stumbled and almost remembered himself, then smoothed again. The preacher spread his arms as though claiming the chaos. "This is the new song," he declared. "Ashgrove will not be bound." I gripped the key so hard it cut my palm. Where's the hatch? I asked Eve. Her eyes widened. You'll tear it apart. Better torn apart than spreading everywhere. May hopped down, chalk dust clouding around her. I'll show him. The preacher's smile faltered. Child, shut up, May snapped, and for the first time his voice caught in his throat. She grabbed my sleeve and pulled me behind the wall. The hatch was still there, waiting like an old wound. We slipped inside. The chamber was worse than before. The bell hung cracked, a jagged line running along its side like a scar that never healed. The sound it made wasn't a note. It was a wheeze, a groan, a plea. The rope swayed, though no one touched it. May pointed. It can't be fixed, but it can be stopped. How? She opened her chalk box. Inside, nestled between the worn sticks of color, was the chase with her name. Put this in the crack, she said. If my name breaks the bell, the song ends. No. I shook my head. It'll take you with it. Her face was calm. Everyone goes someday. I'd rather go giving the town silence than be another walker. Eve's voice came from the ladder. Don't you dare, she said, climbing down fast, her hands trembling. Don't you dare give it that. You deserve more than being a wedge in someone else's mechanism. May met her eyes. Then what else? Tell me. Eve had no answer. I took the chase from May's hand. It was heavier than the others had been, as though her name carried more gravity than the rest. The crack in the bell seemed to breathe, opening and closing with the rhythm of a wound trying to heal wrong. I could shove it in, end it, or maybe end me, or maybe end nothing. Eve grabbed my wrist. Don't. May pressed my hand forward. Do it. The preacher's voice echoed faint through the hatch above. The bell must sing. Don't fail it. I shut my eyes and pushed the chase into the crack. The bell screamed. Not a note, not a sound, but a scream that came from every wall, every stone, every street, every name. The town convulsed. The chamber shook. May clutched my arm and Eve held us both. The crack widened, splintered, raced across the bell's surface like lightning frozen in metal. With a final lurch, the bell split. Silence, real silence. Not the heavy hush of Ashgrove listening, not the hum of waiting, just silence. Then the walls of the chamber crumbled. We scrambled up the ladder, out through the hatch as stone collapsed behind us. The square was chaos. The wall of names flickered, then went dark. The preacher stood rigid, his smile gone, his hands clutching at empty air. Walkers froze in place, their faces blurred halfway between nothing and something. The town groaned like an animal in its death throes. The building shook, windows shattered, the ground split in narrow, endless cracks. People screamed, voices real for once, unshaped by the town's rules. Eve dragged May and me toward the cemetery. The door, she shouted. Get to the door. The seam was already opening when we reached the fence. The key burned hot in my hand, almost molten. I held it high, and the opening widened, wider than before, wide enough for all of us. May leapt through first, her chalk scattering. Eve shoved me after, then followed. Behind us, the town screamed again. When I turned for one last look, Ashgrove was folding inward, collapsing into itself, like paper burning from the edges. The sign at the road bent and fell. The preacher's voice rose once more, furious, pleading, then was gone. We stumbled into daylight on the other side. The air smelled of pine and earth, clean and honest. Birds sang. The road stretched ordinary before us. Ashgrove was gone. I sank to my knees, gasping. Eve stood beside me, her face pale but sharp, her eyes blazing with both grief and relief. May crouched, clutching her chalk box, as though it were all she had left. Is it over? I asked. No, Eve said softly, but it's ended. That's different. We walked until we found a real town with a name on the map. People there spoke to us without glowing. The receipts had totals higher than 0. The mirrors showed only what they should. May drew a face on the bathroom wall of the gas station just to see. It faded in a minute, leaving only chalk dust. She smiled like that was a victory. Eve poured me coffee from a diner pot. It tasted bitter and real, scalding enough to make me wince. For the first time in months, I believed I was free, and yet sometimes late at night, when the world is too quiet, I swear I hear a faint tolling in the distance. Not a bell, just memory, trying to remember itself. But when I say my name out loud, it holds. That's enough, for now. Thank you for listening. If this story kept you company tonight, consider liking the video and subscribing for more myths, legends, and gentle hauntings. Sleep well, and may the trails you choose lead you safely home.